This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
Are these stocks under-owned by institutional Wall Street?
A lot of these companies talking about generative AI.
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
Investors just worried about the ongoing sales slump in China.
And Michael Barr with news.
A ship traveling through the southern Red Sea has been attacked.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Tom Keene, Paul Sweeney, Michael Barr, Lisa Mateo, and John Tucker with us as well today. An extraordinary Wednesday. We knew it would be busy, but Paul, with the news flow today, economics, the Fed meeting, we've got Meta coming out, and all of a sudden, international relations crowds out the others.
International relations, absolutely, Tom. From the Middle East, lots of activity over there. We're going to get some first-rate reporting here to kick it off here. But again, the Middle East front and center for a lot of folks.
Ethan Bronner with us in moments here from Tel Aviv with very difficult news flow over the last, even 12 hours as well. There's a nice lift to the market. Jess Metten helping out there. T-Mobile showing some certain sprightliness here in the last few minutes, but really centered around Microsoft. With a 7% plunge, it comes back. It's down 2 or 3% from where it was.
I thought it was a good quarter.
I thought
the expectations are high.
I don't. Nobody cares my opinion on it, other than I don't get it.
Right.
It's like they go mental on Twitter and the speculators, and down it goes, and then it comes right back as well. We have a crowded news day, including a very important Bloomberg poll. It's really the first decent poll post all the uproar over the last number of weekends. And it really shows a tight race on the road to November 5th. There'll be many other polls out, but this is the first legit, countable poll across the swing states. And is a generalization statistically, dead heat is that the phrase we can use?
I think that's the reporting I've seen here. And again, this Bloomberg poll that historically is focused on the swing states, which a lot of prognosticators say are what's going to determine.
We're on YouTube. Thank you. New York Times with a huge YouTube article today. We're thrilled to be part of the growing YouTube audience. Subscribe out of Bloomberg Podcast. It's growing each and every day. From the Interactive Broker Studios, our Bloomberg Business Flash, John Tucker.
All right, with the news out of the Mideast, let's start with oil. Brent crude, which I'll call the international benchmark, 2% higher, 2.5% higher right now, 80.63 a barrel. As you mentioned, Tom, in the pre-market, Microsoft down just 2.5%. Revenue from Azure, the main growth engine there in recent years, rising just 29% in the fiscal fourth quarter. Chip demand also in focus. NVIDIA most active before they open, up 6%. AMD up 9%. NASDAQ futures as a result up 1.5% right now. Also news from Intel planning to eliminate thousands of jobs to reduce costs there. Intel up 2% pre-market. GE Healthcare cutting its forecast for organic revenue for the full year. Japan, let's give them some love. BOJ hiking somewhat unexpectedly to 0.5%. That's not the end of the hiking cycle there. Yen close to trading at around 150 to the dollar. And the Nikkei jumped by 1.5%, in part aided by the news about the chip exemptions. Right now, Dow futures up 98. S&P E-mini futures 52 points higher. The NASDAQ futures right now up 283 points. We check the markets for you all day long right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker, and that's your Bloomberg Business Flash. Welcome back, Paul and Tom.
John Tucker, thanks so much. Joining us now from Tel Aviv at our news bureau, Ethan Bronner, definitive at the New York Times and now with Bloomberg News, holding court in the Levant, and he joins us here on a most difficult morning. Ethan, which should be our focus? I know you're going to say both, but am I focused on the northern border with Lebanon and a murder there, or am I focused on Hamas and Tehran and a murder there?
Well, you know me a little too well there, Tom. I'm afraid both is the answer. I mean, the fact that they occurred within 7 hours of each other, shows, what a significant role targeted killing is playing in Israel's strategic war against its militia enemies around it. But I do think that they're both important. I mean, the Hamas guy, in a way, his personal killing is less significant than the fact that it was done in Tehran over the course of inauguration of the new president. He was staying in the official guest house, and the missile went right through the window of his bedroom and killed him and his guard. So, I mean, I think both are quite important. And right. Israel has long argued that this is the way they get the other guys to yield. We'll see.
With you as a Cub reporter for Reuters years ago, and the first time I saw your name, Ethan, was with the Boston Globe, you know the territory like the back of your hand. And I think Americans don't understand the narrow distances of Beirut, 80 miles from Haifa, Beirut, 40 and 50 miles from a convoluted Lebanon border. How close is Beirut today for the Israeli government? I mean, how far into Lebanon will they go?
Look, I mean, they say that if Hezbollah chooses to go to war with them, they will take the whole country down. And I will say that since the last war with Lebanon and Hezbollah in 2006, Israel has been studying that country for targets with enormous care, unlike what happened with Hamas, which it was really unprepared for, and all the tunnels and all the things that they didn't know about Hamas. They do quite know the Lebanese situation well, and Lebanon knows that they know, and that's why it seems unlikely that there will be a war. And also because most of the money in the arms for Hezbollah comes from Iran, and Iran really wants Hezbollah there as a kind of guarantor that Israel will, if there is a war between Iran and Israel, it will be on the front line. So I don't think there's going to be a major war with Hezbollah right this minute. Well, if there is one soon, it'll be Israel that starts it.
Ethan, what's the calculus within the Israeli government about maintaining an aggressive military posture while also trying to negotiate some peace here?
So, Paul, that's a great question, and it feels paradoxical or counterintuitive, and it may be. But the Israeli argument is that the only time Hamas actually moves in negotiations is when their back is against the wall. So that the more you push them, the better the negotiations will go. Of course, Hamas says the opposite. They say, now you're screwing around with us. We're not going to be able to give him. You obviously aren't serious about negotiations. And I can't tell you who's right, but that is the Israeli argument.
What is the feeling within Israel right now, within Tel Aviv, from the people? How are they kind of thinking about again, trying to weigh the desire for peace, but obviously, still prosecute this war?
So there's not an enormous desire for peace per se. There's a desire to get the hostages back. Okay. There's the belief that Hamas and Hezbollah and the other militias around it that are sponsored by Iran want this country destroyed, and that they can't rest and let them do it. So there's that. They want their hostages back. But even the mother of one of the hostages being held in Gaza still said, I'm thrilled that Ismail Haniyeh has been killed. Right. He belongs in hell like all these guys. But now let's get our hostages back. So there is that kind of phenomenon, but I would say that broadly there is no argument in this country about going after the heads of these organizations.
Ethan, our institutional memory in America, even for those that aren't aware of it, is October of 1983, 241 U.S. military personnel, 58 French, in suicide bombings in Beirut. I mean, it changed the dialogue. Does the U.S. want to assist in any way in Lebanon, or are we still scarred from that brutal October morning?
Well, it's interesting you raised that one, Tom, because this guy who was killed last night, Fouad Shukr, is supposed to have been responsible, at least partly responsible for that bombing as well in 1983. The U.S., I think, does want these guys dead, but it's sort of less focused on it than the Israelis are. So Lloyd Austin, who was in Asia earlier today, is saying, look, we will support Israel. We did last time, and remember, in April, when the Israelis killed two generals of the RGC, the Iranian generals in Damascus, in the Syrian capital, Iran, for the first time, sent 300 missiles and drones at Israel, and they were stopped through a combination of French, British, and American, and, of course, Israeli work. So I think that will return if that happens, and therefore I don't think that the Iranians are going to quickly retaliate. They say they're going to, but one caveat here is that the guy who was killed was not Iranian. He was Hamas. On the other hand, it was in Tehran. So it's complicated.
To Paul's good question on Tel Aviv, what is the mood in the street? I mean, not over the coffee at the King David Hotel, but the mood of the people of Tel Aviv this morning.
Look, I think that's a great question, and if I could answer it with any deep reporting, I would. Having spent all morning on the phone in front of my computer, I can't really give you an honest answer. My instinct, on the other hand, is that there is a sense of resolution, a sense of pride, and in the intelligence and the military of the country that is able to penetrate to the guest house of the Iranian government and kill this guy. By the way, it's notable that they chose to kill him in Tehran, where he was visiting, and not in Doha, Qatar, where he lives. And that's, I think, because Qatar has been playing a role in these negotiations for hostages.
Terrific brief. Ethan Bronner, thank you so much, driving all of our coverage in Israel from our Tel Aviv News Bureau today. I think your question is just incredibly germane about the mood from Haifa on down, frankly, down to Gaza.
Yeah, and I think what Ethan's been reporting is that there is a steely resolve amongst the people.
Got to dash to the news. It's an incredible news day with the Fed meeting this afternoon. With our news in New York City, John Tucker.
Yeah, you're just talking about this with Ethan. Hamas saying Israel killing its political leader in an airstrike on Iran's capital, putting the Middle East even further on edge. Let's get an update in this report from Bloomberg's Kevin Whitelaw.
As usual, in cases like this, Israel has been reasonably silent on it, but obviously the Hamas has blamed Israel for this assassination attempt, which appears to have been carried out in Iran at his residence. So this obviously is coming on the heels of another attack Israel said it carried out in killing a Hezbollah commander in Lebanon. So it's sparking a lot of concern that this could intensify the conflict, widen the conflict even, and also sort of dashes some hopes for possible ceasefire negotiations.
That's Bloomberg's Kevin Whitelaw. The current vice president and the person who wants to be the next vice president, both out on the campaign trail. Vice President Kamala Harris rallying supporters in Atlanta. Harris publicly calling on Donald Trump to take part in a debate before the general election, saying they need to address the comments they've been saying about her to her face.
So he won't debate, but he and his running mate sure seem to have a lot to say about me. And by the way, don't you find some of their stuff to just be plain weird?
Well, Senator J.D. Vance held events in Nevada. Vance criticizing his opponent as being the Senate's most liberal member back when she was a senator.
She is dangerously liberal, and she will never be the president of the United States because we're not going to let her.
Well, meanwhile, Kamala Harris has wiped out Donald Trump's lead across 7 battleground states. According to the latest Bloomberg News Morning Consult poll, Harris backed by 48% of voters to 47% for Trump. A statistical dead heat in the swing states that will likely decide November's election. Global news 24 hours a day, whenever you want it, with Bloomberg News Now. I'm John Tucker, and this is Bloomberg.
John Tucker, thanks so much. Paul Sweeney, within the incredible news flow this morning, finally, Japan X. I mean, it's like tertiary, but it's like, from an economic standpoint, it's maybe bigger than the Fed meeting.
It's amazing. I'm looking at the yen here, 150. Thank you very much. I'm looking at the yen here, 150, spot 47. That's up 7%
11
rally.
big figures.
Yeah, just since early July. So, I mean, it's really had a strong move there.
Two-part intervention by Japan. They come in and they move interest rates. That's the big story here. For all of Japan, they will finally face two-year yield, I believe, back 15, 20 years as well. We'll have more on this. Japan X on the yen. This is Bloomberg Surveillance.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
You know, John Tucker in the Bloomberg Newsroom with this Bloomberg Business Flash. Of course, we have to start out with Microsoft. Those shares down about 2.7%. They reported fourth quarter cloud revenue slightly missing expectations. Chip demand boosting the NASDAQ futures this morning. AMD shares rising after the chipmakers adjusted earnings per share and revenue beating analyst estimates. Analysts were positive about the sales boost from the AI accelerator, but they also noted a recovery in the PC business. Fed Day. Bloomberg interest rate strategist Ira Jersey telling us yesterday he doesn't expect Powell to signal a September cut. Also, earnings from Starbucks, those shares advancing. The coffee chain reporting third quarter adjusted earnings per share that just topped the average analyst estimate. Comp sales, though, they also declined more than Wall Street projections. Dow futures up 39, S&P E-mini futures up 52, and the NASDAQ futures right now 300 points higher. As far as interest rates on the Fed decision day, the 2-year 4.35 unchanged, 10-year unchanged 4.13. We check the markets for you all day long right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker at your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
John Tucker, thanks so much. Summer game updates.
Yeah.
Summer game updates was swimming in the River Seine.
Oh, boy.
Summer game updates are brought to you by State Street Global Advisors. We thank State Street Global Advisors. We go now to our Olympic expert. Virginie Maisonneuve joins us now, of course, from Allianz CIO Equity. But, you know, there's much more going on than that. And, Virginie, I've got to ask, because it's 92 today, and I don't know how they're doing it outdoors in the Olympics. You were at Université Paris Dauphine. Okay, fine. Did you ever swim in the River Seine?
Never. And, I want to believe that the cleanup program has been good, but I'm not sure I would do it today either.
It is. We saw the triathlon do it today. Some great photos of them diving into the swimmer. And a major shout out to Mayor Hidalgo for getting in there a couple weeks ago and leading the way. Virginie, I think that talks about the spirit of people. Folks, I've watched very, very little of the Olympics, but I'm getting rave reviews of the pageantry and all that. And it's the resiliency of the people. Virginie, the resiliency of the European community. Can they just solve, almost like European exceptionalism? Can they solve the challenges of the day, like manufacturing dearth in Germany or the chaos of France politics? Do you believe in the European people?
Yes, of course I do, but it's going to be tough. As you said, we have some very strong challengers. First, the challenges from the past few years around the energy transition. And of course, an economy, particularly in Germany, but somehow also in Italy, anchored around manufacturing, but also other parts of Europe, as you know, is much more service oriented, etc. But what I see coming with those political cycle versus economic cycle, particularly with the outcome that we don't have still of the elections in France, is really some tension within the institution. I think we'll overcome them, but I think it's going to be really interesting. And of course, at the same time, the economy seems like it's chugging along. We just had the Q2 numbers that were up a little bit, growing 0.3%, but domestic demand continues to be weak, and you have some tensions, if you want, within Europe. So it's going to be tough. Of course, final point, depending on what happens in the US with the election, will we need to increase defense spending much more? The position towards China, the positions with tariffs, all of those are really important points for Europe.
Virginie, when I think of you, when I think of Allianz Global, I think of a global view of markets and opportunities. Where, from a geographic perspective, do you think offers the best opportunity for investors these days in the equity markets?
So, I like to think of regions, but of course, stocks and sectors are really important as well. I still like US tech. I think, I'm really keen to move the portfolios. Of course, we're all bottom up, right, into the enablers and the second derivatives. And I think the Microsoft numbers today were quite interesting as it relates to CapEx for AI, et cetera. And I think that's going to continue. But what I also see around the world is a bifurcation of tech with this shifting world order and China phase 3, right, with China and the rest of the world. So that creates a lot of opportunities for new investments, if you want. In Europe, we still have some very interesting companies. Again, it's bottom-up manufacturing and industrials, automation, some of the energy mitigation, energy savings, etc. companies, and of course some of the larger brand companies, a bit more defensiveness. And in Asia, in Japan, so you've seen the move today with the Bank of Japan, a market that has been rediscovered about a year ago, as well as in China, you still see opportunities. And in China, very unexpected, if you want. Nobody believes in it. But I think the latest announcement by the Politburo on consumption is going to be really interesting on the low end. So a lot of opportunities around the world. But of course, this political cycle versus economic cycle is creating a lot of volatility. Yep. I think we'll have that until the U.S. election is done.
How concerned are you, Virginia, in the U.S. market about some of the concentration risk here in those magnificent 7 names? I mean, a lot of market technicians tell you that's not healthy for the broader market. How do you think about that?
Yeah, so that's very true. It creates a lot, particularly if you manage mutual funds where you have maximum of 10% in specific stocks. So those concentrations can be quite tricky. I think, as long-term investors, what we do is we try to look through them and really buy from the bottom-up companies that, according to a specific style, of course, we have quant strategies, we have growth, we have value, we have income, but that fit and offer that medium-term to long-term opportunity. And look through that. And at sometimes, it can be a bit painful, but other times it plays in your favor. In any case, more diversification in the top names would be really helpful for the sustainability of the market.
Virginia, in the time we have left, your original acclaim worldwide was on work in China, including attending the People's University in Beijing. You have a visceral knowledge of the shifts in China. For example, the English corner at the People's University in Beijing is a place where you go to learn English. Is that English corner the same as when you were there, or is there a radical shift in society in China?
Oh, yes, there's been a shift. So, I was there in 85, 86. The country was very different, right? But what you have that is still there, and it's very important to remember, is that China functions with think tanks, a lot of studies, market studies, plans. And I think sometimes people who are not used to that underestimate the power of those plans and the implementation, the guidance, if you have, that they have, and the continuity. I think that's definitely still there.
Right. This has been wonderful. Virginie, we just treasure our time with you. There's the global sense of it. Virginie Mazenouv, swimming later in the River Seine. She is with Allianz, of course. Microsoft, that's such old news.
Yeah, exactly.
Meta, Facebook today. Do you think it'll go down 7%?
I don't think. I hope not. I mean, I think this market would like to see some of these tech names really out-deliver to kind of support kind of what's happening in these markets. Because you had that rotation trade, Tom, out of some of those magnificent 7 names into some more other sectors, including the small cap with the Russell 2000 outperforming.
I thought Gene Munster was really responsible yesterday. I got a pro tip. Maybe we can get Elon Musk to shut down Twitter 2 minutes after all these tech companies. People went absolutely mental out on Twitter. The shortfall was a decimal point. I'm making this up, folks. A decimal point in Azure. And you should have been here yesterday. John Tucker.
Oh. Nailing it.
Nailing Azure. He absolutely nailed it. But,
I thought it was an island off the coast of Africa.
It's Sweeney's next trip.
Yeah, exactly.
I just found it amazing. The hysteria. Down to 7. Where are we now, Rich, on Microsoft? Down 2?
Down 2 or 3%.
Yeah,
we're okay.
We're coming back.
Coming back.
And
the NASDAQ futures are up 1.6% here. How about that?
Yeah, well, there's a real lift here. S&P up 1%, Dow up fractional. But the level here on futures, Dow, 41,000.
Yeah, that
gets my attention.
Sure does.
On futures, 5,500 on SPX. NASDAQ, as Paul mentions, up 1.6%. VIX hasn't given me any love yet, 16.74. Waiting for that to come in. And the 10-year real yield, wow, a 1.88 handle. That's a lower yield. Worth watching the 10-year. Can it go below 4%? From New York City, Paul Sweeney and Tom Keene, stay with us. Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm John Tucker in the Bloomberg Newsroom with this Bloomberg Business Flash. NASDAQ futures rallying on chip demand. ASML Holdings surging overseas, reporting the U.S. After the U.S. will exclude some of the semiconductor equipment makers of some countries from export restrictions. Advanced Micro Devices gaining in the pre-market trading. Upbeat revenue forecast there. NVIDIA adding about 6%. Morgan Stanley saying the recent sell-off has opened up a good entry point. And as Paul, you mentioned, cloud revenue at Microsoft kind of underwhelming some investors. Shares down pre-market 3%. Next up, Meta. Japan's yen surging the strongest since March versus the dollar. The Bank of Japan raising interest rates, cutting bond purchases. And would you rather have a pimply-faced teenager get your order wrong? Taco Bell planning to roll out a voice AI system to hundreds of U.S. restaurants by the end of the year. You recall McDonald's tried that, and they just
they gave up after like a week.
I said Big Mac.
You know, it's interesting in that it's an employment replacement. There's some people really concerned about this.
I'm like the one person
I
on the
was that
planet
kid
Earth who hopes AI will replace his job.
No, but I was at La Belle de Talk working as a 15-year-old, and
Taco Bell was not around when you were 15.
Thank you, John Tucker. Anurag Rana is going to be with us here in a moment, but we got a parachute. First of all, a headline. We got to do this headline. Mr. Bastian, Delta CEO, says the horror that Mike McKee went through 10 days ago cost the airline $500 million.
Yeah, it was amazing. I mean, for 3 or 4 days, they were having some problems with their
How do you depreciate? Do you amortize that? There it is. We'll have more on that. It's just breaking right now. Jonathan Tamari is in charge of all of our polling here and analysis, and he's the victim here after the wonderful Bloomberg poll yesterday afternoon that really showed Vice President Harris narrowing the Biden gap. John, we got you just for a few minutes here this morning. How does a Trump campaign respond to this poll?
Well, they've been struggling to respond ever since Harris replaced Biden. They've kind of been jumping around from message to message, people accusing her of saying she's only vice president because of her race, which could really backfire. What they seem to be landing on is trying to say, listen, she's a San Francisco liberal. She's having a little honeymoon phase because of this burst of positive energy when she first got in the race, but that they're going to spend a lot of money to define her and bring out some of her more liberal points and drive her numbers back down after this early surge is what they hope happens.
Jonathan, where's the strength for VP Harris coming from? What groups?
Well, I think, first of all, just not being Joe Biden is a big boost for her. I mean, when you see the difference, you can see the difference when they're out there speaking on the stump. Her ability to deliver a message, to deliver an attack is so much sharper than Biden was able to. And then when you drill down, younger voters, black voters, Hispanic voters, all more enthusiastic about her and all, crucial historically to Democrats.
John, one more question, if we could, to get you onto your busy day. Which state are you focused on?
Well, I'm focused on Pennsylvania, and that's partly because I've a long time covering Pennsylvania, but also it's got 19 electoral votes. It's the most of any battleground. And it could be a symbol where Michigan and Wisconsin.
I know you were talking to the governor this morning. Is Shapiro going to be the VP here? Politico says in the next 48 hours we're going to get a VP because it's going to be Governor Shapiro of Pennsylvania.
He seems to be the favorite, and if you talk about the electoral map, he's the one who brings the most along out of any of the possibilities. So it makes a lot of sense.
This has been great. Jonathan Tamari, on short notice, thank you so much for joining us. Valuable this morning. The Bloomberg Consult poll, I was really taken aback, Paul, when it came out yesterday afternoon. I was like, oh, wow. Here's the first decent poll.
It is the first decent poll
voluminous.
Exactly. And again, this poll consistently focuses on those battleground states, Tom, which the political folks tell us that's kind of where it is today, these battleground states.
Our conversation of the day on this tech frenzy. Anurag Rana joins us from Chicago. Microsoft down 7%, now down 3.4%. I found, Anurag, the hysteria out on Twitter yesterday over a little bit of a miss in Azure. And then I see, I think from Amy Hood, that on Microsoft, 8% of CapEx is AI type. Does the public understand all of their CapEx is not going into artificial intelligence?
See, it may not be directly tied to it, but at the end of the day, they have to increase cloud capacity for those workloads. Even if it's not directly tied, think about it this way. You have to digitize your processes. You have to upgrade to the cloud, because without that, you won't be able to run some of those workloads or analytics on top of it.
So, Anurag, what's the street? Give us a sense of what the street's really thinking about Microsoft and the cloud and AI and Microsoft's position. Is the street generally confident that Microsoft is in a good position, maybe faces some risks?
Yeah, I think from an analyst community point of view, we have a very good understanding of what's happening at Microsoft. Sometimes what happens is you have momentum investors who get in and they want an NVIDIA-like quarter coming out of Microsoft. Now, that's not going to happen because for Microsoft, it's a long journey. It's not going to be suddenly somebody's going to buy so many chips and your revenue gets a boost. They have to build capacity. Then people are going to build workloads on it. And that's exactly what Microsoft explained yesterday, that they will increase their CapEx. And the second half of their fiscal year, you will see an improvement in the cloud growth rate. And I think that pacified a lot of investors. Stock was down 7, 8, 9%, but it's only down 2.5%, 3% at this point.
What else are you looking for when you see a Microsoft number cross the tape, aside from kind of this AI angle?
I think so far the biggest contribution for AI has been coming from OpenAI relationship and the workloads that are going on it. We really want to see how AI gets infused in other products across the Microsoft portfolio. We already know, a product like GitHub Copilot or Office Copilot, but we really need to see stronger adoption numbers from there, because down the road, that's going to be the key bread and butter for Microsoft, and perhaps not so much directly coming from OpenAI.
Can we go to Meta? I mean, I guess Meta's not really on your watch, Anurag, but lump it in here with the knowledge you want to receive from Meta this afternoon.
I think it's going to be a combination of capital expenditures and what they are doing for their AI and large language models, as well as their ad revenue. I think you can extend this discussion to not just Meta, but also on Amazon on Thursday, because even they will come out and say they are increasing the capital expenditures. But I think everybody really needs to recognize this thing. The CapEx expansion is happening now, and the revenue will follow, and there is going to be a lag and mismatch between the two, you could say, capital outlays.
So that kind of goes to the issue. I mean, part of the weakness that we've seen in Magnificent Seven over the past, month or so, Anurag, has been that question you just raised about, okay, we get all the spending for AI, but what's the ROI on that? How do you answer that question from investors?
I think a lot of, long-term value investors would understand that you have to build the capacity to recognize that revenue growth. In addition to what you said about CapEx, I think there is another factor that people are looking at, a possible interest rate cut and what the impact of that would have on the small cap universe. We recently did a study where we saw the gap between the large cap valuation of technology and software companies is so much wider than the small caps. And the problem with the small caps is because of the economic slowdown, they have not seen that big AI bump that the big guys have.
Anurag Rana, thank you so much for joining us. The news flow today, just incredible. We've got to run, but Anurag Rana here helping us get through the tech season as well. Way back, Paul, cool people on the street, they had an antenna in their backyard, a zillion miles high, and they had ham radios. We didn't have that.
Those
Did you
were
have
not
that at your
cool
house?
people. I'll be characterization.
Right, so, John,
I'd have to disagree.
I had a CB radio. I had that antenna on my house in Trenton,
There
New Jersey.
we go. Paul Sweeney.
The handle, you know what my CB handle was?
What?
Spitfire.
Spitfire.
How about that?
Then you know that this began, folks, this is the heritage of my family. I got to go there. Collins Radio, Cedar Rapids, Iowa. And there's been, all you need to know, there's been a roll-up of like 42 mergers. We're not going to go into it on radio. We wouldn't do it on TV. And the answer is Collins Rockwell, or I should say Rockwell Collins, excuse me, always out of Iowa, is coming to the rescue of our American institution, Boeing. This has been hugely received by the community. Boeing, Rich, help me here, up 3%, I believe. And this is what people wanted to see. Culp was on the other day from GE. No, he didn't want the job. Alan Mullally, iconic aerospace Kansas. He wasn't considered. And this is a guy, Kelly Ortberg, will take over Boeing with all the aerospace heritage of the University of Iowa, and then from Ames over to Cedar Rapids.
Yeah, exactly, Tom. And I think, talking to analysts, including George Ferguson from Bloomberg Intelligence, and they were saying all they really need, Boeing, is a real manufacturing, engineering, intensive guy or woman. And that's what I think they get hired.
Back when Spitfire was out on his radio.
Kelly is a guy, by the way.
Kelly is a guy. Thank you for that important news, John Tucker.
Well, we got
Spitfire was doing Collins radios a million years ago. What they do now, they're the intricacy of cabin interiors.
Okay.
Of they're competing with Panasonic on like the system I never use. You get on the plane, you watch 4 movies.
Right.
Do you know the Transformer movies? I've only ever seen them on airplanes.
Exactly.
That's what I watch. Can you see me, John? It's important. I watch the Transformer movies on there, and I do it with Rockwell Collins. But anyways, Kelly Ortberg, without question, the biggest job forward for an American executive. Kelly Ortberg will take over the challenges of Boeing. I'm going to say this, Kelly, move it back to Seattle. Pro tip, move it back to Seattle. With our news in New York City, John Tucker.
All right, Tom and Paul, Hamas's top political leader, Ismail Haniyeh, was killed in an airstrike in Tehran. Hamas in Iran blame Israel while taking part in an event in Singapore today. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken was asked to comment on the death of Haniyeh, who was a key figure in ongoing negotiations between Hamas and Israel.
I'm not going to speculate on what impact any one event might have on that. I've learned over many years, never to really speculate about that because we simply don't know.
Well, Blinken says the U.S. remains committed to getting a ceasefire agreement in place. The latest Bloomberg News Morning Consult poll of 7 battleground states, this was conducted after President Biden dropped out of the race, shows Vice President Kamala Harris in a statistical tie with Republican nominee Donald Trump. Bloomberg's Amy Morris has more from Washington.
Harris is riding a wave of enthusiasm among young Black and Hispanic voters. More than a third of voters in the 7 battleground states said they're much more likely to vote now that the contest is between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris. And the numbers rose to 49% and 44% among Black and Hispanic voters, respectively. Almost 2/3 of Black voters say they are now somewhat or much more likely to cast ballots in November. The numbers suggest Harris has a shot at reassembling the voter coalition that propelled President Barack Obama to the White House. In Washington, Amy Morris, Bloomberg Radio.
And Boar's Head issuing an expanded recall of more than 7 million pounds of deli meats as officials continue to search for answers in an ongoing listeria outbreak. At least 2 people have died. About 3 dozen people in 13 states, they have been sickened. At the games, Simone Biles of the U.S. women's gymnastics team seizing gold.
Unbelievable.
In the finals. And yeah, the women dove in, the triathlons, into the Saints, so I guess it's all clean now. Medal count, U.S. leads with 26, France 20, Great Britain 16. Global news 24 hours a day, whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm John Tucker, and this is Bloomberg, Paul and Tom.
John Tucker, thank you so much. Greatly appreciate it. The news flow, we knew it was the busiest week of the summer. We've hardly mentioned the Fed meeting today.
Yeah, you're exactly right. I guess McKee's on a Acela train. We sent him down there.
Yeah, he is. He's,
okay.
He's
well,
like,
Ira Jersey
like
says no signaling for
no
September.
Signaling?
That's what he told us yesterday.
Yeah, I'm with that. I'm not with the. It's unlike the modern Fed to give us drama today. Of what they'll do today. I don't think they're going to raise lower rates rather today, but it'll be interesting. We have Richard Claret, I believe, scheduled, the former vice chairman of the Fed. I got some piercing questions.
Oh, you're doing your special show.
I'm doing my show.
Of
it's like
course.
an 18-hour day.
Oh, we did a little
I'm working 3 hours less than John Tucker today.
Exactly. That's it.
Futures up 53, big jumps. S&P futures up 1%. NASDAQ up a Microsoft 1.6%. From New York City, Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm John Tucker in the Bloomberg Newsroom with this Bloomberg Business Flash. Global stocks rallying, NASDAQ 100 futures jumping this morning more than 1%. A flurry of some bullish news powering a rebound in tech stocks. ASML Holdings surging on reports the U.S. is going to exclude semiconductor equipment makers in some of the countries from export restrictions. And then you have AMD gaining in the pre-market trading, upbeat revenue forecast. NVIDIA, most active, adding around 6%. Morgan Stanley said the sell-off recently has opened a good entry port. Of course, you had Microsoft disappointing for some, down about 2%. In the pre-market. Boeing reporting revenue for the second quarter, missing average analyst estimate. And Boeing also naming Kelly Ortberg CEO. He's a dude, replacing Dave Calhoun. Ortberg is an engineer by training.
Iowa.
Yeah, aviation supplier, CEO at Rockwell Collins, which I guess is part of RTX Corporation.
UTX,
yeah. RTX.
They all merged in the merge.
I know it's confusing.
It's confusing.
Dow futures up 50, S&P E-midi futures 52 points higher. The NASDAQ futures up 303 points. I'm John Tucker. We check the markets for you all day long, right here on Bloomberg Radio. Paul, Tom.
Big lift to the market. There's no question about that this morning. Bloomberg Surveillance, we're brought to you by Interactive Brokers. Discover the future of trading in their next generation trading platform, IBKR Desktop. Download IBKR Desktop at ibkr.com/desktop. It's going to be interesting to see. It's a huge Midwest thing. You got Alan Mullally out of University of Kansas is my recollection. Ortberg out of University of Iowa. It's like aerospace. Mental block now from Bloomberg Opinion. We're going to I got
George Ferguson.
No, we got George Ferguson referencing right now.
And he's a Penn Stater.
Sutherland. Thank you, Ari. Nailed it.
Oh, Brooks Sutherland.
See if we can get Brooks Sutherland. You know, she's
That's
probably
a tough get.
She's probably taking the whole month off because she's French.
She's the Cape.
Or the Olympics, one of the two. We'll effort Brooks Sutherland, who grew up in this milieu of what we've got from Ortberg and Midwest aviation. We'll see if we can do that for you. Good morning, out in the Midwest. Emily Roland saying, why am I here? She's with John Hancock. And a major victory lap for Hancock, who have said, quality, big, stay with it. So I see the hysteria over Microsoft yesterday. I'm looking at the 4 accounting statements. I don't have every answer, but geez, it looked pretty good. It's up 16%, right?
Absolutely. And the guidance was really strong, too, heading into 2025. And you look at earnings for tech companies this quarter, they're tracking to be up about 18% year over year. I'll take it. Meanwhile, you look at this massive rotation into small cap stocks, those earnings are down 18%. So I don't get it.
Paul's got 8 questions because he's got to triple his NVIDIA holding. But let me get one more in here. Emily, what I see is we're trying to figure out our new discounted cash flow. And the answer is with Microsoft, nobody's looking out 7 years.
Right.
What are they doing now? And as Nadella nailed yesterday, what are we doing next year? And maybe what we're doing 26 is the perspective.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it's the show me the money kind of period right now for tech companies. And again, the earnings are there. Yes, it's a multi-year process to fully monetize the investment that many of these companies are making in AI, but we're going to get there. A lot was in the price. The valuations were extended. It doesn't surprise me that there's a little bit of profit taking in tech right now, but we remain overweight, and we think it's a healthy little mini correction here. Again, as there was a lot in the price, it's an over-owned part of the market, and we'll be okay.
What do you make of this, I guess, what is really a rotation into some of these small cap sectors, just maybe some sectors that were maybe underloved here? What do you make of this rotation play?
Well, it's been really interesting. Small caps, as measured by the S&P 600, are now up about 10% on the month, while the S&P 500 is flat. And if you look under the hood, it's all been driven from multiple expansion. The entire 10% is PE expansion. And so I have like a little checklist for small caps. What are some of the things that could be kind of supporting them? And I think about about inflation. Well, we've seen 2 consecutive months of low inflation readings, so that doesn't make sense. Maybe some changes in earnings trends. We just talked about that. That's not happening. Maybe a shift in the macro backdrop. Nope, we're still in a late cycle environment. Maybe the bond market still pricing in 2 cuts. So nothing's really changed except maybe one thing, which is the odds of a Trump presidency have increased over the course of the month. So I think there's a sentiment-driven rally that's politically driven around potential outcomes regarding the election that's causing sentiment to soar. We would fade it.
Well, as Tom was just mentioning, the news flow is so heavy, we're barely touching on the fact that we've got a Fed meeting today, and we're going to hear from Fed Chairman Jay Powell. Again, you mentioned the market's pricing in a couple of cuts this year. Is that enough for this market, or how do you view the Fed, and what do you want to hear today?
Yeah, it's whether or not Powell's going to commit, or whether he's going to keep playing the field, if you will. So is he going to commit to the September cut, or is he going to wait until there's even more evidence?
So like the Red Sox at the trading deadline.
I knew you were going to go to the Red Sox. It's so
the Fed.
Yeah, so it's real. That's what it's about right now. It's like, is Powell going to tell us with more certainty that he's confident that inflation's decelerating? There are more cracks in the labor market. September's a done deal. We think it should be. You know, the Fed funds rate's at 5.5%, core PCE's at 2.6%. You're seeing, again, more and more evidence that deflation is presenting itself.
Right.
But, you know, how hawkish or dovish is that message going to come across?
The backdrop of this, and Paul and I have been waiting for this, Sweeney's nailed this, is the 2 years coming in to 4 decimal points, the nominal 10 years breaking down 4.1297. I'm going to sell that as a 412 handle. And the real yield elegantly comes in now a 187 handle. What does that yield breakdown in fixed income mean for the stock market?
Yeah, it's interesting. You know, markets are still reacting in fairly positive way to lower bond yields. So there's still a kind of bad news for the economy is good news for market scenario. And where markets are still kind of sunning themselves on soft landing island right now. You know, you talk about vacation time. That's what it feels like, because we have this kind of slowdown in the economy that's not super slow, and there's nothing sinister that looks like is happening right now. So the Fed can do this kind of like, I kind of think of it as like a nice guy cut starting in September, just because they can. Now, if you think that the Fed, we can have this soft landing, that's fine, but you're kind of betting against the odds in a way, because there's really only ever been one example of these kind of preemptive cuts, which was in the mid-1990s. So we want to think about any backup in bond yields as an opportunity to lean in and lock in this elevated yield, because we don't think bonds are priced for an economic contraction. So there's a nice opportunity there to get paid income while you wait.
Yeah, absolutely. So how much... I mean, again, on the 2-year Treasury, 4.35%, do I sit there and be quite comfortable, or do I take some credit risk here?
Yeah, we're underweight credit within fixed income just because there's really no risk being priced in. High yield bond spreads are at 306 basis points this morning. That is well below the 20-year average of 500 basis points. So there's not much being priced in. We looked at some data. When we've been at spreads this tight, the forward-looking returns are about flat on a 12-month basis. There's just not a lot to say about the return opportunity based on the fundamentals there.
Why did the Red Sox not pick up Jazz Chisholm? I mean, you're wired in it, old and new John Hancock.
So the biggest mistake I made coming in here today, I studied everything from the Fed to the BOJ to the earnings back. I have my number. I forgot to study baseball, and that was the biggest mistake that I made this morning.
You got to. This is the trade deadline's over. It's exciting, and the Yankees have won 4 in a row against Philadelphia.
I know.
This afternoon, 12:35.
Cashman.
The afternoon game.
Like almost a morning
I may
game.
have to cut the surveillance nap here to watch Philly's dreaded Yankees.
Yep.
Can Jazz hit another 2 home runs today?
Why not? He's been doing a great
Michael
job.
Barr was so upset he took off today.
Did he?
He said, I played Jazz yesterday, but I played Kenny G.
Michael is here. He just couldn't speak. So
if he
he's
can't
writing
speak,
for
he's been screaming for Jazz. Oh, that's why you sound good today. But anyways, he's been screaming for Jazz, so I played Kenny G yesterday. And I got put in the Michael Barr timeout chair.
That's not Jazz?
So he gave me a big lecture. So we're doing Michael Barr Jazz today. And, you know, when you do for Jazz Chisholm, you got to start with Bob James.
Sure, who doesn't?
And there's one song. It was a theme for Taxi.
Yeah,
and
is
it
that
was
right?
all these heavyweights that were on it. Eric Gale, it's all out of New York, and really impressive. Idris Muhammad on drums, and Bob James, and it's Taxi. Jazz, for Jazz Chisholm, New York Yankee. Good morning.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
Apple's still minting more money than God, right?
Geopolitics front and center for global Wall Street.
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
Stocks are coming off of another record high.
And Michael Barr with news.
U.S. Secretary of State discussed the conflict in Gaza.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning. morning, everyone. Paul Sweeney and Tom Keene, Michael Barr, Lisa Mateo, John Tucker with us as well. Part of the team this morning. John Tucker, thank you for being with us. Big lift to the market. Dow up 1%. Check that. S&P up 1%. Dow up fractionally. And the NASDAQ up a solid 1.7%. A lift to the market. The VIX really not cooperating, but I got a nice green on the screen moment. Paul mentioned oil. Huge moves, $2.65 on American oil, back to 77.41. Brent goes over 80. That moment we had with Ethan Bronner in Tel Aviv in the last hour was chilling.
It was, and it's an escalation, if you will, or a broadening of some of the conflicts in the Middle East, and we're seeing that in the price of global crude.
Got Meta out this afternoon after the Microsoft frenzy. Thank you, Anurag Rana. Too short a visit with Mr. Rana. We'll have Gargi Chaudhary here in a moment to say the least. Japan acts. Could they pick a slower news day? I mean, I could just see him at the Ministry of Finance in Tokyo saying, let's make the announcement when they're mental over in the West. Well, we are mental with the news flow, including the Bloomberg poll. And Tokyo acts not once but twice. They come in on the yen and they raise rates as well and talk about a bond adjustment to their crazy policy.
And Tom, the yen is down to 150.
Yeah,
I mean, big move.
You know, some of that's short coverage, people that were betting weak yen and they got it wrong, and so there's some convexity there. But still, it's a dramatic. Euro doesn't move 108 at 26. From the Interactive Broker Studios, our Bloomberg data check, here is John Tucker.
All right, Tom and Paul, the S&P 500 set to open over 1% higher. That would erase Tuesday's slump, even though Microsoft reported slower cloud growth. Meta up next for the tech earnings. The NASDAQ 100 index futures jumping more than 1% there. Advanced Micro Devices delivering an upbeat revenue forecast. And in the pre-market, those shares, they were higher. Also, we have NVIDIA, most active pre-market. That is up 5.9% right now. It's jumping as Morgan Stanley sees a good entry point. And, of course, as you mentioned, Fed decision day, they may or may not signal a September cut. Bank of Japan, as you mentioned, raising its benchmark interest rate, unveiling plans to half their bond purchases, still sitting on a lot of bonds. That's underscoring its determination to normalize monetary policy. And with the news out of the Middle East, Brent, as you mentioned, over $80 a barrel. And Boeing early going up 2.5%, naming veteran engineer Kelly Ortberg as the next chief financial officer. Dow futures 37 points higher. S&P E-mini futures up 54, and the NASDAQ E-mini futures up 318 points. And we check the markets for you all day long right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
John, thanks so much. Gargi Chaudhary now, Chief Investment Portfolio Strategist, BlackRock, joins us. Gargi, I'm just going to cut to the chase. I mentioned this with Emily Roland of John Hancock. Finally, yields break down. We're at the bottom of the range of support. Maybe we're even something like breaking through support down to some new lower yield regime. Do you buy it at BlackRock, or are we just testing lows before the Fed meeting?
Good morning. It's great to be here. Thank you for having me again. So I think where you own bonds is going to be important in this cutting cycle. So we have talked about, come to your show and talked about sort of owning that belly of that curve, so belly of the Treasury curve, so owning the 3 to perhaps out to the 7-year point. And I think that trade still makes sense. Obviously, we've seen a massive rally in the belly of the curve this year, but any backup should be bought. Now, I think it's a slightly different story for the very long end of the curve. So if you're thinking about buying the 30-year Treasury or 30-year credit, I think that is slightly more complicated because I think there's going to be a lot more news on budget deficits, on tariffs, taxes, and a lot of other things that we're going to hear through the rest of this year that can steepen the curve even further. So despite the rally, buy the belly is what I'm telling my clients.
Buy the belly. How about credit risk? How much credit risk, if any, are you suggesting your clients take on these days?
Frankly, we are telling investors to buy investment grade as well as high yield credit, but doing so in a very bespoke and a very active manner, because there is that tug of war, we would say, between the extremely tight level of spreads, both across IG and high yield. You're seeing that in some of the richest percentile over the last 10 years or so. Yet, what investors and what clients are talking to me about is really the all-in yield available. So when you have that situation where you have a tug of war between very attractive all-in yields and very unattractive spreads, we think investors should move to an active style of management approach where investors can rely on portfolio managers that can pick the right sectors, the right ratings, and the right credits for the portfolio. So yes to credit, but yes also to active management and credit.
Okay, how about on the equity side here? I mean, what we've seen over the last month with the small caps really outperforming the market dramatically. Is that for real, do you think?
I think that the broadening out that we have seen is certainly a very healthy, very positive sign. We ourselves came to your show and talked about how we think that the AI beneficiaries like utilities and energy can continue to do well. And I think that broadening out that we're seeing makes sense in pockets. However, where we have some doubts, and certainly you're right, small caps have seen a tremendous amount of both inflows in IWM and IWM option call volumes trading up. But it's very hard for me to believe that just because we're beginning to see some expectations of rate cuts, that the profitability of small cap companies are going to massively shift. Until we see that profitability take change, I think we are going to continue to tell investors to stay up in quality. So away from the small caps, away into higher quality parts of the equity market.
Gargi, you're the first victim I've asked this to, so good luck with that. And I don't want to get you in trouble with Mr. Fink, but the basic idea is Robin Wigglesworth over at the Financial Times did 6,000 words yesterday on the Gargi Chowdhury world. And it's basically the new equitization of the bond market, where finally the technology's in place at BlackRock and other places where you can trade bonds almost like stocks, which you can't because bonds aren't stocks. But the new fluidity of the bond market, do you buy it?
Absolutely, I buy it. I really love it, and I think that investors, our end clients, are going to be the beneficiaries of it.
In what way?
So when you think about,
come on, Rob.
Yeah, absolutely. I think fixed income ETFs are a immense tool in an investor's toolkit to take advantage of that exact phenomenon that you're talking about, where you can today, if you decide that you wanted to own some treasuries, like I talked about in the 3 to 7 year part of the curve, you can own a very transparent, very cost efficient ETF, IEI in your portfolio. And if you wanted that active management in credit, you can own BINC, again, transparent in your portfolio. This is something that investors are gradually, if we look at the growth of fixed income ETFs, they have adopted, they have embraced, and are going to continue to do so in an active manner in the months and years ahead.
Paul, get one more in here, but I was late. I should have gone to an ETF on the triple leveraged all cash fund. I screwed that up. Balchunas didn't help me on that.
Didn't help you out. Gargi, we're going to hear from the Fed here today. I think most people are expecting, no movement, maybe a little signaling as it relates to September. What do you expect to hear?
Yeah, so I think there's going to be some amazing verbal gymnastics, gold-winning verbal gymnastics in terms of keeping options open, so not pre-committing to that September rate cut, but at the same time signaling that they have seen a little bit on the data improvement, especially on the inflation front, that gives them additional confidence where a rate cut may be appropriate soon. So what we expect to see is some signals in the third paragraph, obviously that very important sentence around expectations of rate change. So all eyes on the third paragraph. And then in the press conference, I expect that Chair Powell will continue to reiterate that they expect to have rate cuts soon. But, if you're sitting there expecting that the Fed is going to pre-signal September and sort of lock that in, I think you might be disappointed, because I don't think this is the time to do that. So they're not going to lock in September, but but really heavily signal to September.
Gargi Chaudhry with us with BlackRock today. Huge news flow day. The key thing, folks, to know is yields are breaking down. I'm not willing to say we're out of range, but boy, we're right on the edge, the cusp. As they say, 1.88 on the 10-year real yield. The nominal 10-year yield is a stunning 4.13. Are we on the 399 watch?
Oh, yeah, I think so. Why not?
I think we are. 4.13. I go there. It's the Ian Lingan watch is what we...
I'm looking at the 30-year mortgage, Tom, 6.82%.
It's a huge. I don't know where that trips. It's going to be a vengeance when it goes. With our news in New York City, John Tucker.
All right, Tom and Paul, the overnight assassination of Hamas's political leaders stunned the region, leaving many worried about an escalating conflict as Iran points the finger at Israel. Israel not directly taking responsibility for the killing, but Iran blaming Israel nonetheless. The supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, vowing revenge, saying Israel, quote, has paved the way for severe punishment. Meanwhile, while taking part at an event in Singapore today, Secretary of State Antony Blinken was asked to comment on the death of Hayana and rising tensions in the region.
We've been working from day one not only to try to get to a better place in Gaza, but also to prevent the conflict from spreading, whether it's in the north with Lebanon and Hezbollah, whether it's the Red Sea with the Houthis, whether it's Iran, Syria, Iraq, you name it.
Blinken says he's not going to speculate on what impact any one event is going to have on ceasefire talks. Kamala Harris wiping out Donald Trump's lead in the first Bloomberg News Morning Consult poll since the vice president replaced President Biden at the top of the Democratic ticket. Bloomberg's Jody Schneider has more from Washington.
She is seeming to ride this wave of enthusiasm among younger voters, Black and Hispanic voters, much stronger showing than a 2-point deficit for President Joe Biden before he dropped out of the race. She's backed by, in these 7 states, 48% of voters to 47% for Trump.
Bloomberg's Jody Snyder reports Harris has taken Trump's lead in Arizona and Nevada and more than doubled Biden's lead in Michigan. Paris game update. Simone Biles and the women's gymnastics team season gold in the finals. Triathlons got underway today. The women dove in the Seine after days of delays over water quality. The medal count, here it go. U.S. leading with 26 medals. France has 20 medals. Great Britain has 16. Global news, 24 hours a day, whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm John Tucker, and this is Bloomberg, Paul, and Tom.
I don't know if I'm pronouncing this right. Tehupo'o Tahiti.
I think so.
The next heats of the Paris Olympics postponed Tuesday afternoon in Tahiti. Strong winds, sheets of rain whipped through the surfing venue. Have you seen the waves? They're like, I've never seen the ginormous Hawaiian waves.
I'm not sure why they didn't have this at the Jersey Shore.
Exactly. Great question.
Belmar,
sure. Absolutely. So I don't know, but you got to go to Tahiti to get the waves, I guess. There's
it's like honestly, it's the one thing I would watch is the surfing competition.
I'll watch, sure. Absolutely.
Postponed in Tahiti. That's your Olympic Tahiti update. Sweeney's going there next month. Futures up 55. NASDAQ up 1.7% as well. Nice lift to the market. VIX at a stick 16.66.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm John Tucker in the Bloomberg Newsroom with this Bloomberg Business Flash. We're data dependent, so here's some data. ADP employment looking at a little lighter than actual, 122,000 non-farm payrolls. Yeah, 122. The expectation was for 150, and that is down from the previous reading from ADP of 150. Global stocks advancing, oil prices jumping with the tensions in the Middle East. NVIDIA, most active before the open, up over 6%. It's been raised back to top chip pick at Morgan Stanley. Chip demand in focus, pushing NASDAQ futures higher this morning. Shares of AMD rising in the pre-market trading after the chip makers adjusted earnings per share and revenue that beat analysts' estimates. Analysts were positive about the sales boost from its AI accelerator. They also noted a recovery, believe it or not, PC business. Microsoft this morning down over 2%. Revenue from Azure, the main growth engine there in recent years, rising just 29% in the fourth quarter compared with a 31% jump in the previous quarter. Dow futures up 84, S&P E-mini futures up 60, but NASDAQ futures right now 331 points higher. And we check the markets for you all day long right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker. That's your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
John Tucker, thank you so much. Summer Games updates here on Bloomberg Radio, worldwide on YouTube. Summer Games updates. They're brought to you by State Street Global Advisors. Paul Sweeney and Tom Keene here, driving in a cacophony of news flow. There's no other way to put it today. I've got the VIX in a stick now, 16.59 with yields lower. Perfect timing for Jason Dreo. He's head of America's Tactical Asset Allocation, a real presence out on LinkedIn as well. Jason, from June 30, how has your view changed?
Our fundamental view hasn't changed. The macro conditions we think still are playing out as we'd expect, which is moderating growth, moderating inflation, and a Fed that's going to start cutting in September. We were kind of always in that camp, so that has not changed. The rotation that's taken place, we think it's a little bit, overdone, or at least probably kind of coming towards the end of its runway. In a large part because for that to continue, you need both really strong positioning, which is probably petering out, and also macro that I would say has to be great, or like Goldilocks and not just good. And I think we're going to get good data. We're not going to get great data.
I assume when you were at Yale, you darkened the door of Professor Schiller's class, which is a study of exuberance. What's the UBS study of exuberance right now?
It's interesting that we had a strong first half of the year for equity markets, really a year and a half, but I don't get a sense there's a lot of exuberance in the markets. And a simple way I would look at it is look at things that would be good indicators of exuberance. My dissertation was on IPOs. We're not seeing a lot of activity in IPOs. It's relatively muted. Certainly not conditions where prices are popping on the first day. We had exuberance in that market in 2020, 21 with the SPACs. M&A activity, sort of another sign of exuberance. It's still relatively contained. So to me, it almost feels like the markets have been climbing a bit of the wall to worry, kind of skeptical about how this would play out. So it's not exuberance. This is, comparisons to the 90s, this is definitely not 99 or 2000. This is more like 96.
This is, can you imagine at a bar with Jason Dreo and, he's got a dissertation in IPOs? That's just deadly. How many pages was your dissertation?
Well, the dissertation was about 200. But then for fun, because I just love doing this so much, I wrote a book on IPOs. It's about 350 pages. And Tom, if we get a drink, I'm happy to talk your ear off about it if you like sometime.
That would be
there
good.
You go. That's a date. Hey, Jason, in terms of asset allocation, where are you guys at UBS? What's that kind of your call here? I don't know, stocks, bonds, alternatives. How do you think about that here?
Yeah. So we are, I'd say, relatively balanced right now. We don't have strong tilts one way or another. I think one of the challenges that we face, and probably a lot of investors face, and this goes back to the exuberance comment, is that equities are run up so much, you fear of kind of chasing it, even though we still see decent upside. Like, to year end, we have a 5,900 target on the S&P. So, good upside. I think near term, it could be, choppy. At the same time, we think rates are probably going to drift a little bit lower. And, I heard the earlier conversation about where the 10 years are going to go. I think, by year end, our call is 385. So kind of across the board, it's we think a relatively good environment for various risk assets. But if there's a consistent theme we have right now, it's kind of seek quality, whether it's quality fixed income. There's not a lot of spread out there in, at least in corporate credit. And again, sort of my comment before about being reluctant to chase some of this performance in rotation, but rather stick with kind of quality stocks. Tech is still one of our most preferred sectors, and we think some of the sell-off is probably getting a little bit overdone in the tech sector. So that's kind of how we're biased, fully positioned, I'd say, but tilted towards quality, not defensive, but quality, just given some of the overall risks and uncertainties still out there.
What do you think we're going to hear from our Federal Reserve chairman this afternoon as it relates to kind of their thoughts on these rates?
So if it sort of plays out as we think, it could end up being a relatively uneventful Fed meeting. They had opportunities before the blackout period to offer guidance to suggest maybe they won't cut in September. Like I think, Powell was actually at an event with David Rubenstein, and Rubenstein asked him, do you think the market pricing is aggressive? And he could have pushed back, and he didn't. So to me, that's a tacit, admission that, the committee, at least Powell, certainly wants to move by September. And so it really kind of comes down to how strongly is the guidance, both in the statement and in his comments, just basically indicate, if data's there, we will cut. So they may want to still be a little bit vague, but that's what I'd watch for. How explicit they want to be in terms of guiding to September.
I got a 10-year nominal in 2 basis points, 4.1200. And granted, it can move at 2 o'clock today. Folks, our coverage, the Fed decides at 1:30. But Jason Drow, what I find fascinating here is what society does with lower rates if we actually break down. Don't we have a housing frenzy? Don't we have everything lightens up for small business buried? Isn't that going to be hugely GDP generative?
So in some way, you're asking probably the most fundamental question about for interest rate policy for the Fed, right? Because you had the Fed raising rates aggressively. You had the economy didn't seem to slow very much. And yes, there's evidence that parts of the economy are being constrained right now, but it seemed to have a muted impact. So if you extend that logic, you think, well, if they cut rates, it shouldn't have a very stimulative impact. My concern, or at least my sense, would be that there may be an asymmetry going on here, that there are parts of the economy that have been immune, like households that locked in at low rates. Higher mortgage rates have not had an impact. Higher asset prices have helped them spend. Whereas consumers who don't have that, who are a little more stretched, they've been impacted. If you lower rates, the high-end consumer, asset prices probably go even higher. They're even better off. The low-income consumer, the small business that have been constrained, they can start to spend. So I think there's a chance for it to be even more stimulative than perhaps the expectation. I would imagine the Fed's a little bit worried about that. All of which is why I think when we look to next year and sort of beyond, I'm sort of on the optimistic end of just how well kind of the U.S. economy continue to grow. That there's good private sector fundamentals, and the economy continue to be at a 2% plus level.
Right. Why can't Bill Ackman raise money in his IPO? Asking for a friend, Jason.
I don't comment on specific IPOs.
I busted your chops. I busted Jason, and don't be a stranger. Jason Drow, thank you so much with UBS. That was an unfair question.
I don't know what Mr. Ackman was doing. Matt Levine, Bloomberg opinion columnist, had an interesting piece on Mr. Ackman, what he was trying to do, talking about initially a $25 billion IPO, maybe stoking some demand by lowering it to a $2 billion range and making some scarcity value a driver there. I don't know. We'll see how it plays. Odd.
We'll have to see out. The IPO thing used to be a frenzy. I mean, you had a consecutive 15 days in a row, I think 3 weeks in a row, with rubber chicken lunches.
Oh, yeah.
It was a number of years ago.
Yeah, it's so that.
Remember, you go to 2?
Sure. Yeah.
You show up at 12.
And the underwriters knew it. They would schedule one at 12 and the other 1:30, so everybody could go get from one hotel to the next.
There was one guy, wonderful guy, Pioneer Group, years ago, who had a pink highlighter in one hand, one fingers, and a yellow one in the other, and he'd go through sources and uses of cash, making one pink, one yellow, just to see what the flows were. That was back in the day. Nowadays, there's no rubber chicken lunches anymore, right?
For the really big deals, I think where they need a lot of participation, there are, but
that's
otherwise they can rip.
That's your IPO coverage for the day. That's what we come down to. We have a lift to the market. SPX up 61 points, 1.1%. We're going to make 2% on NASDAQ. Huge explosion, 1.86%. VIX starting to give me some love in his stick, 1.1 points, 16.62 there. Wow, a 15 print would be stunning. And the yield regime here, really, really something this morning. We'll have to watch that as well with the economic data. And of course, stay with us. Thank you, Commonwealth, for all that help on economic data. It starts today, but really clocks in tomorrow in the jobs report on Friday. It's Fed Day 1:30. The Fed decides. This is Bloomberg Surveillance.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm John Tucker on the Bloomberg Newsroom. This Bloomberg Business Flash. Ahead of the Fed meeting this afternoon, we have some data. Private payrolls increasing 122,000 this month. That's according to ADP. That's actually the fewest number of workers since the start of the year, and kind of consistent with signs of a softer labor market in the U.S. Futures signaling solid market open. NVIDIA surging in the pre-market trading. It's been renamed top U.S. chip stock pick by Morgan Stanley analysts. Advanced Micro Devices jumping at a bullish outlook. Meta Platforms getting ready to report after the close of regular trading today. And Mondelez shares higher pre-market trading. The Oreo cookie maker projecting, this is really what matters, annual organic revenue growth coming in at the high end of the previous forecast. If you've opened an Oreo lately, you will find, at least my observation, is that there's less of the little white filling in there.
I thought so too. I quaffed one the other day. It's like a new thing. What's great about my refrigerator, you open it up, and there's always a case
There's like
of
vodka and
Jenny
Oreos.
Cream Ale. Jenny Cream Ale off to the left. But on the right side, you have to have the stick of Velveeta.
Yeah,
if you grow
sure.
up in the Midwest.
Yep.
You know, the big stick of Velveeta that makes, that's a Mondelez product, I think.
There you go.
Is James Lord's going to hang up the phone if I talk about this quality food anymore? And economics, ADP out, a little weaker than expected. That moves the market. There's no question about that. I'm going to get a 2% up NASDAQ in a moment. Don't have it yet. But into tomorrow and Friday, their commitment to what we do here at Bloomberg Surveillance. Our economic indicators brought to you by Commonwealth. Join over 2,000 independent financial advisors who are taking control of their growth. With advisory-centric support and future-ready technologies, grow on your own terms with a partner dedicated to your success. Go to commonwealth.com to learn how. We got to talk about this for 2 seconds, Paul. Intel, what a train wreck.
Boy.
10-year track record, 1.55% per year. Gelsinger's like now. Cut thousands of jobs to reduce costs. We don't have anything further on that. Mackenzie Hawkins and Jane Lee are reporting for Bloomberg News. They got to catch up. That's all there is to it.
Yeah, exactly. And this is a Bloomberg exclusive talking about these job cuts here, but boy, they really fell behind the competitors for these
Let's bring over James Lord at Morgan Stanley, his FX world to the world of the Japanese people. And Stan Fisher was always big on this. The percentage move in yield. Yields moved from 2% down under 0% for years and years and years in Japan. They've exploded this morning up to 1.05%. James Lord, can the people of Japan survive a stronger yen in the policies of the Ministry of Finance and the Bank of Japan?
Yeah, morning, Tom. I think the Japanese economy will be just fine with the level of the yen where it is. I mean, I think the move up in dollar yen to 160 was clearly a big overshoot. I mean, if you think about how cheap the yen became in that move, it got back to, in real terms, against the dollar, the cheapest levels that you'd seen since the mid-1960s, right? I mean, this was a very, very weak level. Like the idea that that the Japanese economy can't sustain a stronger level of the yen than that, I think is not really reasonable. I mean, for us, like dollar yen at 145 is probably more fair. If you start to kind of dip substantially below that, then yeah, I mean, maybe the BOJ starts to get a bit concerned about the pass through to inflation and what that means for the reflation story. But I think at these levels, it's absolutely fine. I mean, it's clear from the BOJ statement today and the comments from Ueda-san in the press conference that the weakness of the yen has been a factor in their decision. So you can understand the response from the yen now as they're moving to higher rates.
James, we're going to hear from the U.S. Federal Reserve this afternoon at 2 p.m. Wall Street time. With that backdrop, is there a bear case for the U.S. dollar out there at all?
Well, I think against the yen, I think it makes sense, right? You've got the Fed, which we expect to be markets pricing a cut for September. We don't expect the Fed to be doing anything to disrupt that pricing. If anything, I think the question is going to be whether or not you could price a little bit more of a risk of more cuts throughout the course of the whole year. Our US econ team has been forecasting three rate cuts by the end of the year. So, the bear case for the dollar is that gets priced in, and when you have a BOJ that's moving in the other direction, a way to sort of hinting at the risk maybe of another hike by the end of the year. I think dollar yen can easily come back down. So we are looking for that move to happen, and we, as I say, 145 for us is a reasonable level. As to whether it catalyzes a broader dollar sell-off, I'm not so sure, because I think the bigger story for the dollar is actually that global growth is starting to weaken, right? You look at the data that's coming out from China. The data that's been coming out from Eurozone has been a little bit iffy as well. And if you add in a slowing US cycle, then all of a sudden, global growth doesn't look great. And lower US yields in that environment doesn't usually lead to a weaker dollar. It's
markets on the move right now. I got to interrupt, James. Markets are really beginning to move here. 4.11%, 4.11% on the 10-year. We almost got to a 4.10 moments ago. Equities lift even further. NASDAQ up 2%. Paul, I look at the mix of this right now. I thought this Fed meeting was like, me, John, Lisa hanging out. Right. It may be important.
It may be important. Tune in today, 1:30 p.m. Wall Street time for that broadcast. So, James, here, where else do you see value out there in currency space?
So we've been pretty constructive on sterling. I think change of government, bit of political change has been helpful for investor sentiment. The data's actually been pretty good as well. You started to see, in contrast to the Eurozone, actually you've seen some pretty good numbers coming out from the UK in terms of the PMIs. So, I think that still has some value. We've been looking for euro sterling to head down to a sort of around 82. So I think that's an attractive trade. But I think for me as well, within an Asia context, just coming back to the yen theme, I think CNH versus Japanese yen, I think, is a very interesting cross. Those two economies moving in quite different directions. You've seen PBOC cutting rates. You've seen weak data out of China. I think those two crosses could diverge quite meaningfully.
James Lord, you have a giant in Tokyo, Robert Feldman. What does Dr. Feldman report on the Japanese economy, the Japanese people at this time?
I think Dr. Feldman is bullish on Japan. He's been there for many years. He's obviously seen through many cycles, and as far as I understand it, Dr. Feldman is bullish on the reflation theme and thinks that Japan has a real shot of sustaining more normal levels of inflation. So I think he's optimistic.
James, thank you so much. We've got to keep it shorter today, folks, with the news flow coming on right now. Just absolutely extraordinary. James Lord at Morgan Stanley, he's correct. Robbie Feldman has said the Japanese experiment, the Western prism of how we look at it, is flawed, and there's a vibrancy there, of course, as they deal with China. Right next door, Tina Fordham to join us here in a bit. The market won't go down. That's all there's. I thought we were all dying. Yesterday at 4:15, the world was coming to an end.
Right, and now we've got the S&P, Tom, up about 1.1%, and the NASDAQ up 1.9%. And as you called out, the yields are coming in yet again. The 10-year Treasury off about 3 basis points, Tom, 4.11%.
Should mention oil up. We have two, what do I say, murders, assassinations? I don't know what the right language is. Yep. 2 deaths in Tehran and in Beirut as well. Huge storm. Thank you, Ethan Barana, for reporting this morning. David Gura working on a big take right now on Israel. Oil up a full $2 here. West Texas, Brent crude back over $80 a barrel. John Tuck will have that in the data check. Just let's go back to Intel here quickly. We're spinning around on tech, but we got all this AI stuff. Is Intel part of the AI discussion? I don't think so.
I don't think so. I'm reading the reporting from Bloomberg News here today about those job cuts, and part of it was to fund a turnaround that Mr. Gelsinger, the CEO, wants to really aggressively accelerate for Intel.
Let's go.
And they're saying, listen, guys, we've missed out on this AI aspect, and we need to really start investing. And is it too late, I guess, is a question.
On this day, incredible news flow. Boeing, 20 years ago, iconic institution, plain and simple. Intel, all you got to know is da-da-da-da.
Right.
Iconic institution.
Intel inside.
And we're talking about him collapsing with Mr. Ortberg coming in to save the day at Boeing. We're going to save the day right now with a news report from John Tucker. John, good morning.
All right, Paul and Tom, Iran's supreme leader promising severe retaliation after the assassination of Hamas's political leader in Tehran. Ismail Haniyeh was killed in an Israeli airstrike on the Iranian capital where he was attending the inauguration of Iran's new president. Bloomberg Israel Bureau Chief Ethan Bronner has more from Tel Aviv.
He's not Iranian, and that may reduce their desire to do something. But I mean, it was at a big state ceremony to inaugurate the new president. It's hard to imagine that they don't feel the need to do something dramatic, and we shall see what it is.
At Bloomberg's Ethan Bronner in Tel Aviv. The death comes hours after an Israeli airstrike in Beirut that killed a senior Hezbollah commander. The current vice president, the person who wants to be the next one, both out on the campaign trail. Senator J.D. Vance holding an event in Reno, Nevada.
If you are in this country illegally, start packing your bags right now because Donald Trump is coming back.
Meanwhile, at a rally in Atlanta last night for Vice President Kamala Harris's campaign, Harris fired back at comments recently made by Trump and Vance about the Biden administration's work at the border. Harris says a bipartisan deal failed because Trump had lobbied Republican lawmakers not to pass it.
He tanked the bipartisan deal because he thought it would help him win an election. Which goes to show Donald Trump does not care about border security. He only cares about himself.
Meanwhile, the latest Bloomberg News Morning Consult poll of 7 battleground states, this conducted after President Biden dropped out of the race, shows Vice President Harris in a statistical tie with Donald Trump. Paris game update. Simone Biles and the U.S. women's gymnastics team winning gold in the finals. The overall medal count has the U.S. leading with 26 medals. France is 20. Great Britain has 16 medals. Global news, 24 hours a day, whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm John Tucker, and this is Bloomberg. Tom and Paul.
John Tucker, thanks so much. Ron Dicker over at Yahoo has got this. I like this headline. The Olympics opening ceremony TV ratings are in, and wow.
Yep.
And it carries forward. I'm seeing NPR, I think, has ratings up 80, 90%. Granted, the pandemic, Tokyo's on the other side of the world. You know, I get it. But the best thing I saw is Ian Bremmer has a photo of the volleyball court, like where you have lunch if you go to the Eiffel Tower, you sit in the grass and, you know, try to speak French. And it's just gorgeous.
It's fantastic.
It's like a home. Have you watched much of it?
I have. And, you know, my expectation coming in, like I think a lot of people, was that this is going to be a hugely successful Olympics visually and financially for NBC because it's Paris in the summertime. And how can you not have, you know, great views there and great images. And again, some of the early data is coming back. And again, almost 80% increase over the Tokyo Games 3 years ago. And again, as you mentioned, lots of mitigating issues there, but still a pretty solid opening here. And then you had Simone Biles and the U.S. women's Olympic team.
What's the update on Notre Dame, since you're talking about Paris? Is it fixed yet?
No, it's almost, I walked by it in March. It's like you really get like choked up what they're doing to it. It's opening, I believe, December-ish.
Okay.
Will be the opening, and the images I've seen are spectacular in terms of how do you take this tragedy and then rebuild it.
Yeah.
Is my amateur take, but they couldn't get it open for the Olympics.
But still, nonetheless, that timeline is.
The timeline's amazing.
I'm not going to mince words. It's business leadership. It's the Dumas family at Hermes. It's Arnault at Louis Vuitton. The rest of the French elite have really ponied up for it.
Yep.
And in terms of French design, to get it right. Our design is a good day. Finally, we can begin the show. The NASDAQ is up over 2%. Microsoft, they're going out of business.
Exactly.
No question about it. NASDAQ up 2.1%. It's Fed Day. Our coverage at 1:30 this afternoon. Bloomberg Surveillance.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm John Tucker, the Bloomberg Newsroom, with this Bloomberg Business Flash. Let's start you off with the data. This is an important one. Labor cost growth closely watched by the Federal Reserve, cooling in the second quarter, cooling more than forecast. Employment Cost Index, this measures wages and benefits, increased 0.9% in the April to June period. And then more evidence of slowing labor market from the ADP payrolls, lighter than expected there. In the pre-market, shares of NVIDIA most active, up 7%, not far behind Advanced Micro Devices, up over 7%. AI chip demand boosting their sales forecast. Intel also up pre-market. Intel planning to eliminate, among other things, thousands of jobs. They're trying to reduce costs and fund an effort to rebound from the earnings slump and the loss of market share. S&P E-mini futures 69 points higher. That's up 1.25%. The Dow futures up 91 points. NASDAQ E-mini futures 400 points higher. And with Treasuries 2-year yield down 2 basis points, that's at 4.34. The 10-year yield 2 basis points lower, that's at 4.11. We check the markets for you all day long right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker, and that's your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul, Tom.
There's so many different ways to cut it this morning. Please stay with us on YouTube. Subscribe to Bloomberg Podcast. We're there. We'll be with you for 9. Are you doing 10 o'clock today?
I am.
Paul Sweeney hour?
Absolutely.
Alex Steele,
Alex Steele, we're here for a couple hours, 10 to
The
12,
news
Bloomberg
flow-
Intelligence.
The news flow, folks, to the Fed meeting today is just absolutely extraordinary. On Microsoft, and Sweeney called me up last night. I'd just gotten up from the surveillance nap. He was at the Vespa shop getting it fixed. 407 is where Microsoft cratered last night. The world's going to end as we know it. And it's up $8, almost $9 now to 416, closing at 422 yesterday.
Yep. Yeah,
I don't know what to make of it.
Again, I thought it was a solid quarter. It's all about, kind of what the expectations were in the marketplace. But I think as people are, like you, Tom, are diving through the numbers a little bit deeper, they're saying, it was a pretty solid quarter here, any way you slice it.
Joining us now for a 3-hour conversation, Tina Fordham. It was Fordham Global Insights. Last time she was on, it's a blur, folks. She was like absolutely outstanding. Tina, I don't even know where to begin this morning. But let's begin, and I had the honor of talking to Ethan Bronner this morning, and I know David Gura, folks, is working on a big take. Tina Fordham on the state of Israel. I go back to the assassination of Yitzhak Rabin to look at a new, more angry Israel. How angry is Israel this morning with these 2 assassination murders, deaths?
The assassinations of the Hamas official, the political leader of Hamas in Tehran, where he was attending the inauguration of the new Iranian president, was a very bold step and signal for Israel to take. And then, was it yesterday, or it's just, as you said, a blur, another assassination in Beirut? Does Israel want to expand the war, or, as some have suggested, is Netanyahu taking these bold steps so that he can claim victory and end the war? I am not an optimist on this, though, Tom.
All right, Tina, so that kind of brings you to, I think, one of the questions today, certainly from a lot of viewers, is I thought we were maybe on a path to some type of peace negotiations, and then out of the blue, it seems, these 2 high-profile assassinations. Where do you think the Israeli government is, the Israeli people are, in terms of next steps?
I think we've got to look at this and the Venezuela developments and Ukraine, for that matter, in the context of our elections coming up in November. Last week, Netanyahu had, 4 standing ovations in his address to Congress. He visited Trump in Mar-a-Lago. The Harris juggernaut is continuing. Could it be that Netanyahu feels that he's got a window, a very narrow window, to accomplish some goals and take out more of the Hamas leadership? Or does he want to drag the United States into war? I'm more inclined to the former. the idea of having a narrow window to accomplish some big strategic objectives.
All right, so Tina, let's go down to Venezuela here. Can you put into context what's happening down there, and what do you think will eventually kind of fall out from all of this?
So after many efforts in the past, it had looked like the opposition in Venezuela was ready to take power in an election. They were polling with a huge lead, something like plus 30 points. Such a margin that it would be difficult, they thought, to have these election results falsified. What's happened, Maduro, who's been in power for 13 years since the death of Hugo Chavez, who was popularly elected for his part, has falsified the results. Either that, or he's just taking a long time to count them, because it's been 3 days. About a dozen protesters have been killed, huge crowds in the streets. And the Organization of American States has said that Maduro's response bears all the hallmarks of a falsified election. So it's not too, it's not too late for a democratic transition, but it might get worse before it gets better.
Let's stay on this. I just don't want to jump. There's so much news flow, Tina. My head is spinning here on a, almost into August summer morning. On Venezuela, Tina, do you detect an Latin American foreign policy? Does Washington have a LATAM policy?
Well, we haven't heard from the Biden administration, and I return you to that idea of a narrow window. And I think I said on the last program, one of my Fordham geopolitical razors, that governments can only concentrate on one thing at a time. I think eventually we'll hear something from the State Department and the Biden administration. But so far, we've heard from Lula in Brazil, being cautious, from Boric in Chile, but Russia and Iran and the United States are also linked on this one. The last thing the Kremlin wants, or Tehran wants to see, is a successful, popular, democratic transition.
So, Tina, as Tom was mentioning, there's a million ways to go here, and I apologize for jumping all around, but while we have you, what's the latest coming out of Ukraine? It seems like a little bit of momentum going back to Russia. Any updated thoughts to how this plays out?
Yeah, this is the danger zone summer. I think yesterday Russia launched its sort of biggest drone attack on Ukraine for some months. It's also the height of the summer fighting season. And I'm arguing that the period between now and November, and maybe until Inauguration Day in January of next year, is going to see an uptick in geopolitical risk. And that matters for your listeners, because they're all watching the Fed. Conflicts are inflationary, and this is the time to go for it.
Hugely valuable. Tina Fordham, thank you so much. Fordham Global Advisors, really can't say enough. Fordham Global Insight this morning. The market likes what it hears. Among these many stories this morning, futures up 70. I was going, maybe, sort of selling like we'll get to 2%.
Yeah.
On NASDAQ, forget that, 2.2%. The NASDAQ just explodes up. There's no other way to put it. Let me give you those levels. We're up 409 points on the NASDAQ, 19,345 is well. I got yelled at yesterday. Michael Barr.
Well, yeah, he
was,
with no voice, even when he doesn't have.
He
his
lost
voice.
his voice yelling at me.
That's exactly right.
And so we're doing, for Jazz Chisholm of the New York Yankees, we got to be all jazz, and we're playing the field here. Dave Grusin out of Colorado, working with Sidney Pollack, did all sorts of movie stuff. But one of the greatest things he did, it was a TV show before my time. Are you ready for this?
Yeah.
Peter Gunn, which I do not remember.
Okay.
And the theme was instantaneously iconic. The composer John Williams played the piano a million years ago, like 70 years ago. David Grusin, the theme from Peter Gunn, because Michael Barr wants real jazz.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
Why are we upset if we're creating jobs?
Inflation's still a thing out there for the everyday consumer.
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
The economic calendar jam-packed today.
And Michael Barr with news.
Tensions between the U.S. and China have heated up even more.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning across YouTube. Tom Keene, Paul Sweeney, John Tucker in for Michael Barr, John Tucker in for Lisa Mateo, John Tucker in for Gina Martin Adams. We'll have her on in a moment. We're going to get through this as quickly as we can. Huge news flow. Fed meeting today. We're not going to talk about the Fed meeting with Gina Martin Adams. We're going to talk about a market to the moon. NASDAQ up 2.2% as we speak. We're out on YouTube. Subscribe to Bloomberg Podcast. Our new distribution, New York Times, with like a zillion-page word article, rather.
I know.
On the YouTube. Future of YouTube. We're on the
taking over TV.
The cusp of innovation, I can say. Apple CarPlay as well, and Android Auto. Good morning. Right to it with our Bloomberg Business Flash from the Interactive Broker Studios, John Tucker.
All right, data ahead of the Fed meeting. Equity futures pointing to a solid market opening. NVIDIA surging about 7% of the pre-market trading, being renamed top U.S. chip pick by Morgan Stanley analysts. AMD, Advanced Micro Devices, jumping. They had a bullish outlook. A broad gauge of labor cost growth, closely watched by Fed officials. The employment cost index cooling in the second quarter, more than forecast. You also a little earlier had ADP showing American companies having the fewest number of workers since the start of the year, and wage growth slowing. This is what the Fed wants to see. Earnings update 282. The companies in the S&P 500 reporting so far 79% delivering positive earnings surprises. Dow futures up 87. S&P E-mini futures 70 points higher. And the NASDAQ futures right now 411 points higher. That's a rise of 2.2%. Those Treasury yields 2-year down just about 2 basis points, 433 there. The 10-year yield down almost 4 basis points at 410. And we check the markets for you all day long right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker. That's your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
John Tucker, thanks so much. Ricardo, thank you. People know that I can't even pronounce Gina Martin Adams. Ricardo saves the day. The surfing in Tahiti is Teahupo.
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 Hike.
Teahupo. Thank you, Ricardo, for that. It saves the day out on our Twitter and LinkedIn following. And if you want to get smart about the market, look to Gina Martin Adams with her great work out on LinkedIn, particularly readjusting a lot at Bloomberg Intelligence. She's the only one working there. Everybody else is taking 4 weeks straight off. Victory Lap, you nailed this earnings season.
Oh, thank you.
I see OSG. That's the new abbreviation, folks. Organic sales growth. It's a little bit tepid. Is that the new norm, or does it rebound into 2025?
According to analysts, it's kind of the new norm. Analysts aren't really anticipating a whole lot of rebound in sales growth, but just sort of a steady state of mid-single-digit sales growth all the way through 2025. So if we do, what I will say about that, though, is if we do get a rebound in sales growth, it's going to really fuel a lot more optimism.
Are we going to get more intels? I mean, Gelsinger comes out and says, look, it's failed. My whole theme is seriously, folks, I believe corporations adapt and adjust. With a vengeance into the end of the year?
I think we are actually seeing operating margins power a tremendous amount of growth. And it has been underappreciated the degree to which margins can continue to power growth for more than a year, which is also very interesting because companies are just incredibly efficient, becoming significantly more efficient over time. And we're seeing net income margins top expectations and operating margins top expectations. So companies have been very focused on efficiency in this environment of sort of steady state sales.
Paul, should we go all Yardeni on her and ask her year-end 25 Dow Jones call?
You can't do that to me, Tom. I have to back away.
Have to back away on that. All right, so how about this rotation trade into the small cap and just, I guess, out of the Mag 7? It feels like that's a thing. I thought it might have been just a 1 or 2 day trade here, but Seems like it's a thing.
Yeah, well, let's see, right? Because today NVIDIA is just skyrocketing to
Yes.
the moon again. So I do think by the end of last week, we've gotten to the point where the Mag 7 was somewhat oversold. And Mag 7 companies do tend to persistently top earnings expectations, tech at large as well. So in the very, very short term, it does look like they were oversold, due for something of a bounce. But longer term, the dynamics of fundamentals as well as the technicals would suggest that we've started some form of a rotation. I think the real key to that is going to be energy. And this is a sector that's been frustratingly slow to sort of recover. It's been the big drag on earnings. Financials is part of that trade as well, and financials had a great start to earnings season, but energy's been a disappointment. As much as top-line earnings growth is beating, energy forecasts are still falling. And we need to get some stabilization there to really power that trade even more.
Yeah, it's interesting. 'Cause energy, I don't know where to go on that one, because I don't know where this whole green transition is going to go, and is it good or bad for these energy things? So that's got to be a tough play there.
Whoa. You're living the green transition.
Oh, I am.
He's like Roman Holiday on the New Jersey shore.
Vespa.
In his Vespa, the hair pulled back. He's got the ascot scarfy thing going like Greg Peck.
Absolutely. That's how we do it down at the Jersey Shore. All right. What sectors are screening well for you guys as we kind of power through this earnings cycle?
Yeah, so our sector model at the end of June was the last time that we updated that. And the top sectors in the sector rotation model were a combination of financials and healthcare, really early cyclicals. It sort of put tech in the middle of the scorecard, said, look, tech's had a great run. It's time for a bit of a breather. That's what I'm most worried about. Is it really in the midst of a breather, or is it just such a short-term pause that the scorecard's going to be caught behind? But financials and healthcare both do look like they're primed for a pretty strong recovery in earnings as well as price fundamentals over the course of the next 6 months.
You're so good at taking away the cliches. Okay, I'm looking at UNH, folks, 440,000 employees, dog of dogs for the last 3 years. I'm only doing this to impress Gina Martin Adams. I just did a fitted standard deviation of the moonshot of UNH from April up to now, and it's a perfect 5 standard deviation move. A negative 2.6 up to positive 2.4. I think that's called a breakout.
Yes.
Is that what we're going to see for the rest of the year in other sectors?
Yeah. I think that all of these sectors that have been left behind have significant potential to start to play catch up. Really, this market has been so single dimensional. It's been all about tech, the mega cap stocks. We've seen no valuation expansion in the median equity in the S&P 500 so far this year. It's all been the mega caps. So there is definitely an opportunity for strong resurgence in the rest of the index, provided that the companies step up in terms of earnings. And we're seeing that in pockets so far. I wouldn't say it's a mass trade, but you can't get greater than 10% earnings growth on the index without participation, and we are seeing that
There's
emerge.
something going on, Paul. 10-year real yield has a 186 handle.
Yeah, I know. Here you go.
1.86. There's something Ira Jersey in the air.
Yeah.
All right, so let's just go to Ira's remit. What's he going to, I mean, do you care what the Fed does today or says?
That's a great question. I think as long as they guide for September, that's pretty much anticipated by the equity market. If they cut, it could be quite a shock to the equity market. Why behind the cut would be a big question mark. But I do think the equity market has started to price for up to 100 basis points of cuts over the course of the next year. In fits and starts. It's very difficult to determine what's priced into the broader index right now because we have had that concentration. The concentration has really just been in the very, very strong earnings growers and mega cap stocks. The rest of the index multiple on median looks very, very low. And so we could see some re-rating in those stocks reflecting a change at the Fed.
One of our interns was just in my ears, the guy from University of Florida. He says, our coverage begins at 1:30 today.
Okay.
You think I don't know that? My God, the intern's here. 1:30 today. Thank you for that pearl of wisdom. Go University of Florida. How'd you get into finance at University of Florida?
I was a marketing major.
You were a marketing major. You were a loser. What happened?
Yeah, I took my first finance course and I just fell in love. It sounds like such a nerd thing to say, but I could not get enough of finance.
Did you have you have the Zvibodi textbook everybody had?
I had all of it, Tom. And the extent of my nerddom goes so far as to the fact that I worked in the Department of Finance, Insurance, and Real Estate for my part-time job. I could not get enough of finance. And there's several wonderful professors there, but Dr. Houston was my initial sort of foray into finance.
Right.
I still go back every 6 months.
Do you believe in the
I visit
Florida
the
boom?
professors as if they're my best friends.
I look at the pythons in the Everglades, the damn alligators in Orlando. Do you believe in a sustained Florida boom?
I think it's going to be tough in the very, very southern part of Florida unless we change some major habits and we really go back and fill in the gaps in the landmass in Florida. Northern Florida is probably fine, but it sure is going to get hot.
Yeah.
It already is hot. And Gainesville is in the northern part of Florida.
Different.
Oh my gosh, it's insane.
Like, give us an anecdote.
You know, there's still plenty of people that are relocating into Florida. It still is a very attractive location.
No, I'm very safe and secure at the Jersey Shore.
Exactly.
No Vespa yet.
No Vespa.
We're out of time, but can you come back and do more?
I would be happy to.
Our surveillance, I'm moving to Miami correspondent. Gina Martin Adams with a brilliant earnings season call here of a more tepid revenue. So what? Margins look great. Futures up 74. With our news in New York City, John Tucker packing for Florida.
Well, the Middle East bracing for more potential violence after Israel took out two high-profile figures backed by Iran in less than 12 hours. Bloomberg's Jamane Bersetti has more from Dubai.
The strike in Beirut took out a senior Hezbollah commander very close to Hezbollah leader Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah. But then the strike in Iran was also a very surprising development. Ismail Haniyeh, the leader of Hamas, was killed in that assassination. And the interesting thing is that it happened on Iranian soil.
Bloomberg's Jamane Bersetti reporting he was in Tehran for the inauguration of Iran's new president. Kamala Harris wiping out Donald Trump's lead across 7 battleground states. The latest Bloomberg News-Morning Consult poll shows Harris was backed by 48% of voters to 47% for Trump. A statistical dead heat. Let's get more with Bloomberg's Kevin Whitelaw.
I think to me the most interesting figure in the poll was you're seeing in a number of different key groups that Democrats need to win, sort of blacks and young voters and women. You're seeing a much higher propensity, a likelihood of plan to actually vote in November. So obviously turnout is in all of these states is going to be an enormous factor. And I think that had been something that was really weighing on the Democrats when Biden was still atop the ticket, this notion that people would just stay home. They didn't like their choices.
That's Bloomberg's Kevin Whitelaw. More help on the way for those strapped with student loans. Starting tomorrow, the Education Department will begin mailing borrowers with at least one federally held loan with information on proposals to forgive the student debt. President Biden's actions on student debt relief could relieve loans for more than 25 million additional borrowers. Paris Games, Simone Biles and the U.S. women's gymnastics team seizing gold in the finals.
I don't keep count. I don't keep stats. I just go out here and do what I'm supposed to, and I'm doing what I love and enjoying it.
As for the medal, sounds like me. The overall medal count, the U.S. leading with 27, France 20, Great Britain with 16. Global news, 24 hours a day, whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm John Tucker. I'm not keeping count. This is Bloomberg, Paul, and Tom.
All right, John. Tom, I'm looking, you're mentioning the surfing in Tahiti, so I had to Google map it because I didn't know where Tahiti was. It is literally in the middle of nowhere. It's in the south.
9,800 miles from Paris.
Oh, my goodness. It's in the South Pacific Ocean, equidistant from like North and South America and from Australia. I don't know how the explorers found it back in the day. I mean, talk about a needle in a haystack.
It was a big deal because they got fresh water. It's a huge deal.
Do we still call it French Polynesia?
Yeah, it's what it says on the
Yes,
Google
I
Maps.
believe we still do.
Yeah.
Okay.
My parents
Bora
went, my parents went and adored it. They loved it. Loved it, loved it.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm John Tucker in the Bloomberg Newsroom with this Bloomberg Business Flash. Stocks are staging something of a rebound. NVIDIA surging 7% pre-market trading after being renamed top U.S. chip stock by Morgan Stanley analysts. Advanced Micro Devices, that's jumping this morning among the most actively traded in the pre-market. Bullish outlook from them. Microsoft down 1.6% after their results after the close of regular trading yesterday. U.S. labor cost growth index, this is closely watched actually by Federal Reserve officials, cooling in the second quarter by more than forecast, so that's very Fed-friendly. Boeing appointing Kelly Ortberg as the next chief executive officer, entrusting a retired veteran of the aviation industry with one of the more complex turnaround challenges in corporate America. And Delta bracing for about $500 million negative impact from the technology breakdown this month that led to thousands of canceled flights and tarnished their reputation. Dow futures up 108, S&P E-mini futures up 72, the NASDAQ futures 424 points higher. That's up 2.25%. We check the markets for you all day long right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker. That's your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
Thanks so much. The problem is, if you work with David Kostin, you got to send out a 72-page deck.
Yeah.
Or you're not really at Goldman Sachs.
No,
I mean,
exactly.
you got to send the deck out.
Charts.
Joining us now, Ben Snyder out of Brandeis. With what a joy. He gets to work with Kostin. I'm sitting up in the food court, having my obligatory Cheez-Its. Kostin sits down, and we talk for an hour and a half about getting it wrong on the market, getting it right on the market. And the only fallback is granularity. You do your work. Joining us now, the one who really does the work for equity strategy at Goldman Sachs, Benjamin Snyder. Ben Snyder, what's it like working with David Kostin? Is it like 80 hours a week you're there on Sunday at 10 a.m., putting together a 72-page deck?
Every hour with David is a pleasure. I've had the pleasure of working with him for almost 15 years. I look forward, hopefully, to many more ahead.
My deepest sympathies. Where are you now on adjusting your call? I got Microsoft out. World falls apart yesterday at 4:15. I got a rebound. I got a Fed doing what they're doing. Talk to Hotsias. And finally, I have a yield breakdown really indicating a new lower yield regime. What does the Standard & Poor's 500 do, Ben Snyder?
Well, the things you outlined are pretty favorable for stocks. We have GDP growth still very healthy, as I'm sure you heard from Jan. We have earnings growth for the S&P pretty healthy, as we're seeing every day, including last night and this morning. And then you have, presumably, the Fed starting to cut within the next couple of meetings. That's also very friendly.
So, Ben, given that background, do I stick with the Magnificent Seven, or do I try to participate in what seems to be a pretty meaningful rotation, maybe out of some of those names, maybe into some smaller caps or some sectors that have not performed as well?
I think that's right. There's two parts to every rotation, at least. And one part of this is perhaps some budding concerns about the return on investment from AI capex among those mega caps. But the more meaningful part of this rotation, and really the first part of this rotation, if you remember, started at the last CPI report. And it was basically the market becoming convinced that inflation is no longer an issue for the Fed, that they're going to start cutting soon. And that means that the average stock, the mid-cap stocks, the small-cap stocks, all have an easier road ahead.
So what have you seen out of earnings this cycle so far?
Well, we're almost exactly halfway through the second quarter season. And so far, two things really stand out. The first is the pace of growth, which has been very solid. So far, we're on track to grow the second quarter earnings year over year by about 9 or 10%. That's great. And that's on the back of healthy sales growth and a little bit of margin expansion. I think the second thing that stands out is a little less positive, and that is just that the beats we're seeing aren't nearly as large as what we've seen for the last couple of quarters.
Beats. I hate that phrase. I don't fault
beat
Ben
and raise,
for that.
Beat and raise.
And what's this phrase the analysts say? Great quarter.
Oh, you never heard me say that.
Not once. You hear Goldman Sachs, no Goldman Sachs analyst has ever gone on and said, great quarter. Ben Snyder, I got to go to the money here right now. Michael Mauboussin at Credit Suisse years ago changed our dialogue on capital allocation. We are still in a new economy mystery where, witness the Intel announcement today. They're going to blow up Intel. There's no other way to put it. Discuss the Magnificent Seven and how they persistently generate free cash flow growth due to careful capital allocation. Discuss what you and David Kostin see there.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. It's important to remember before anyone was focused on the AI investment boom of the last year and a half or 2 years, these stocks have outperformed for most of the last decade. And they've done so because they have great business models, they have moats, they have above average revenue growth, and they have profit margins that are 2 or 3 times those of the rest of the S&P 500. So that means a lot of cash flow generation, and they've successfully reinvested that cash flow to fuel successive growth.
Do you suggest their PEs that I see on the DES screen of the Bloomberg are unhelpful to our listeners and viewers?
I think the PEs are really the issue these stocks have struggled in the last couple of weeks. You know, as you were mentioning, the earnings results have been pretty good. There's really nothing that has changed that story I was just talking about above average revenue growth and strong profitability that we've learned in the last few days. It's really about valuations that are substantially above average, valuations that are probably above average because of excitement about AI-fueled growth, and perhaps a little bit of recalibration about those expectations.
All right, Ben, unlike Tom and John Tucker, I missed the Magnificent Seven trade, so I got to catch up here as we head into August. What sectors screen well for you guys right now?
Well, I don't even think you need to look down into sectors. I think if you take a step back and you say the Magnificent Seven question is too hard, you can just look at the equal weight S&P 500. You know, it's done very well over the last few weeks as there's been this violent rotation. If you would just own the average S&P stock, you'd be very happy.
All right, so going forward here, again, where are you suggesting we'll get maybe the best performance in this market, you know, going forward?
Yeah, so I think the key here is to think about what's changing. And I mentioned strong earnings growth. That's not changing. If anything, as I said, we're seeing smaller beats relative to the last couple quarters. I think what's changing is the start of the Fed cutting cycle. And so we should think about where in the market have high rates really been an overhang and where are those easing?
Right. Ben, one final question. You've had the privilege of, I'm busting your chops about Kostin, but also with Abby Joseph Cohen, who just joined us from Columbia Business School. What is the price for our listeners and viewers who choose not to participate in the market? Market timing, or they're all cash. What is that ultimate price?
The ultimate price is a long-term historical average real return of about 7% per year. That's pretty attractive. It's been a great strategy for a very long time, as Abby will tell you, as David will tell you, and as hopefully I can convey to you right now.
Okay, next time I need a 30-page deck, not a 72-page deck. I was up till
I'll do my best.
Unless I read that. Ben Snyder, holding court at a small shop, Goldman Sachs, downtown. I just can't say enough about their acuity. Zero Hedge does the traders.
Yep.
They do, not every day, but if you get the advanced subscription or whatever, they will have the trading desks at Goldman Sachs, what the hedge funds are doing, what long-only buy-side's doing in that. But there's a real granularity there that it's really, whether you agree or disagree, is wonderful. Kostin lifting up the S&P guesstimate at Goldman Sachs.
Yeah, talking about Ben Schneider, talking about some of these tech companies and the moats they have around their business. You know, you wonder how they get those moats in it. I think for a lot of these tech companies will tell you just long-term capital allocation, investing in these businesses over the long term. And some of the CapEx investors are pushing back on some of it a little bit now because they want to make sure that it gets the proper rate of return on that investment. But by and large, I mean, that's been the Amazon story for 30 years. We're just going to keep investing in our business.
One of the advantages of fossildom is I can remember sitting in an office with a DEC computer on my desk.
Digital equipment.
And going, this ain't going to work. And then the good people at Weighing Labs, this ain't going to work.
Right.
And it's just, as Mobison and others, David Kostin, Abby Joseph Cohen, we are struggling with the idea of large scale. And the size of J.P. Morgan, the size of Microsoft and the rest is just really extraordinary. What a day. And the news flow. I almost took off this week.
Exactly. And then we've got the Fed, Tom. You've got to come back this afternoon and break down what we're going to hear from the Federal Reserve. And hopefully it'll be kind of a nothing burger and we can kind of focus on September.
Market pricing that in 4.10% on the 10-year yield. We're on the 399 watch there. The real yield, wow, a 186. Yields move, lower yields, higher bond prices. We need to get the market open. Bloomberg Surveillance.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm John Tucker, and the New York, waiting for the opening bell of the New York Stock Exchange this morning. AMD shares, they have been rising this morning in the pre-market. Adjusted earnings per share and revenue beating analyst estimates. Analysts were positive about the sales boost from its AI accelerator. And first trades opening right now. S&P 500 jumping 74 points, up 1.3%, 5509 on the index. The Dow Jones Industrial Average 47 points higher. That's up 0.1% right now. And the NASDAQ 100 opening up 2.25% higher, up 425 points. And we check the markets for you all day long right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker, and that is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
Renewed oil again, up $2. Brent crude $80.58. On the Summer Games, big success. Paris, interesting. Sweeney says it's just the greatest. Our Summer Game updates brought to you by State Street Global Advisors. State Street Global Advisors, thank you for your commitment to our briefs on the Summer Games. Right now we're going to get a brief from the best in Washington. Nancy Cook joins us to say she's our District of Columbia reporter, doesn't give her due credit for following the election grind. Nancy, when you saw the Bloomberg-Morning Consult poll, you know there's 40 other polls coming out. What's different about this poll than the others now and in the future?
Well, thank you so much for having me. I think what is different and new is that this is one of the first polls that we have seen from swing states since Vice President Kamala Harris became the presumptive Democratic nominee. And it's just really crucial because it shows that she has really closed the gap with former President Donald Trump in these swing states. It shows us that she is getting a lot of enthusiasm from suburban women, young people, Black people. Go ahead.
Well, the criticism of the poll was it when you go out and you poll people, you get who you get. And typically polls, I believe, are more Democrats than Republicans, and then they adjust for that. Do you have confidence in the polls? And I mean not only the Bloomberg Morning Consult poll, but the whole racket of 45, 60 polls that we have in America.
Well, I think polls have been really tricky. And, you raise a great point. I mean, they were certainly, have been wrong in the past. I think that what you can look at is that, the New York Times and Siena College also did a poll last week showing, Vice President Harris gaining ground on Trump. And so while I wouldn't put stock in any individual poll, I think that, that you can draw some trend lines based on the totality of what you were seeing. I think that we saw former President Donald Trump be super dominant the first half of this year. And I think that what we're seeing now, based on our poll, but also other polls that have come out recently, is that Harris is going to give him, I think, much more of a run for his money than Biden did.
Is there any ability to get a sense of whether this is just kind of the honeymoon period, euphoria driving these numbers, or whether there's something deeper there?
Well, I think that we won't know that until after the Democratic National Convention, which is in a few weeks. There's certainly a honeymoon period. I think Democrats are wildly enthusiastic about her candidacy, but, she hasn't been under a ton of scrutiny yet. She hasn't picked a running mate. She has started to do some campaign events, but she's not on the campaign trail day in and day out or being asked questions. So I feel like, how that plays in September is really an open question.
So what is, I guess, who is really supporting this strength in Harris? Do we have demographics that really stand out to you?
Sure. So a bunch of the demographics that have stood out to me from our poll is that she is picking up a lot of support with young voters who were very turned off by, Biden's handling of what was happening in Israel and Gaza. She is turning out, or a lot of people who are suburban women are expressing enthusiasm for her. The Trump people have had a very hard time winning those folks over. And then the Trump team was really hoping to make inroads with young Black men in particular. And what we're seeing is Black voters are very enthused by her candidacy. And so those are all ways in which she could sort of rebuild the Democratic coalition.
I saw, Nancy, that she amended something to do with oil production. I can't remember in the last couple of days because she's got to win Wisconsin or, oil in Pennsylvania. The details don't matter. But what matters here is, does a pro like you suggest she will be a Venn diagram with Biden policy, not of 100%, but will she be like 80% Biden policy? Can you quantify that?
So that's a great question, Tom. I think it's still really early to tell. What I have been told from her advisors is that she's not, for instance, going to come out with like a whole new economic agenda or a whole new economic policy. So in that sense, it's going to be like, sort of keeping and talking about a lot of the Biden policies, but I think she is going to emphasize different things,
yeah. Nancy Cook with us right now. Let me do a data check, Nancy. We got huge news. They don't go away. Nancy Cook, don't go away. Dow up 51 points. NASDAQ, S&P rather up 1.2%. NASDAQ explodes up 2.1%. VIXen over a stick, 16.39. The yield is where it is this morning, folks. I have a 4.10. Stunning on the 10-year yield. And the real yield, Nancy Cook woke up this morning and she said, what is the inflation-adjusted 10-year yield? 1.86%.
Boom, there you go. Hey, Nancy, is there a feeling in D.C. about what role, if any, President Biden will play in VP Harris's campaign?
I think he's playing very little role. I mean, he's at the White House. He's still president, obviously, serving out his time. And I think he and his people are intensely focused on his legacy and getting through the next 6 months. But I don't think he's going to play a huge role.
Any early feel as to, I guess, the next big move for the Harris ticket is the vice president role here. Is there any feeling as to when and who it might be?
So we had published a story on Saturday that said that her short list had really been pared down to, a few people: Senator Mark Kelly of Arizona, Governor Tim Walz of Minnesota, and Governor Josh Shapiro of Pennsylvania. I think those are the people that her team is most focused on, and I think that we'll have a pick by Tuesday of next week. She's going to do a big swing through a bunch of the battleground states, like Pennsylvania and Nevada, and she's going to have her running mate with her. So it's going to come, in the next few days.
All right. Nancy, we got to do some economic data. Thank you. Thank you, Nancy Cook, for her leadership and our coverage of this election. It gets more interesting by the day. The Bloomberg Consult poll out yesterday afternoon, and there'll be many more to follow. Thank you, Stephen Stanley over at Santander, for bringing to my attention the employment cost index out at 8:30 this morning, ticked in. That's part of the reason we're seeing this excitement. The survey, previous number was 1.2%. Survey was 1% lift. Second quarter employment cost index, and it came in light, 0.9. Yep. That's to me, that's a huge deal. The ECI folds in wages and benefits.
Yep, exactly. Real full picture
Frankly,
of the cost.
It's what I use, right or wrong. There's a lot of other series to use on labor, average hourly earnings and the rest. But that's a really germane point, that you got ADP coming in light, and right behind it at 8:30, you got ECI coming in light. We got housing data here before the Fed meeting at 1:30.
Yeah, looking at that ECI index, Tom, as you called out, 0.9%. Also down markedly from the prior period, 1.2%. So again, a little bit of a slowdown here. And again, the equity markets like what they see here.
To 4 digits, 10-year yield, 4.0988. Yep. What's it going to be, like a 6.5% mortgage?
Yeah,
30-year
we're getting there. Yeah,
rate?
exactly.
6.7.
I'm sitting on my big fat 6% mortgage. I felt like a dummy when I took it out, but
325.
325 for John.
Congratulations.
Yeah, but that's like 1960. You got that mortgage.
The vice president, she had to publish all this. Her mortgage is under 3%.
Is that right?
Yeah, it's unfair.
So's Alex Steele.
I've said it
before.
Thing. I'll say it again. The mortgage is less than the tolls each month.
Really?
Yes.
Now, do you, in the time we've got left here, right? We've only got like 30 seconds, but can I just assume Governor Hochul's going to bring back your congestion tax like a 10 p.m. election night?
Well, yesterday she at her news conference in which she announced funding giving some money to the MTA to try to finish some of the First Avenue subway project. She said, it was temporarily paused, or whatever word she used. So
Yeah, it's
that's the
temporary.
implication for the
Paused.
governor.
Okay, it's a mini.
Second half.
I mean, you've got all the readers set up all over this Manhattan.
Yeah.
You got to do something, don't you?
Yeah, I wave at them when I drive
Exactly.
by. Nah. Well, we'll have to see. S&P up 65 points, 1.2%. NASDAQ up 2.2%. With our news in New York City, John Tucker.
And Tom, Hamas says an Israeli airstrike in Tehran killed its political leader. Ismail Haniyeh was seen as a key negotiator in ceasefire talks. Bloomberg's Israel bureau chief Ethan Bronner is in Tel Aviv.
The talks will certainly suffer in the short term and perhaps in the long term. The Israeli argument is, and I can't vouch for its accuracy, that the harder they hit Hamas, ultimately the more flexible Hamas is in these talks.
Bloomberg's Ethan Bronner. Meanwhile, Israel says it has eliminated Hezbollah's top military commander in an airstrike on southern Beirut. Israel saying it was in retaliation for that strike that killed 12 kids at a soccer field in the occupied Golan Heights. The latest Bloomberg News Morning Consult poll of 7 battleground states conducted after President Biden dropped out of the race shows Vice President Kamala Harris in a statistical tie with Donald Trump. Harris is full steam into her campaign with a stop in swing state Georgia. And Bloomberg's Ed Baxter has more.
With Republicans saying she's weak on immigration, she is pledging to sign the border bill that Donald Trump killed, saying she plans to show him what leadership looks like. And she's also going directly after him, saying she hopes he does not back out of the debate.
I do hope you'll reconsider to meet me on the debate stage. Because as the saying goes, if you've got something to say,
Ed Baxter, Bloomberg Radio.
And Senator J.D. Vance held a rally in Reno, Nevada. Vance criticized his opponent as being the Senate's most liberal member back when she was a senator.
She is dangerously liberal, and she will never be the president of the United States because we're not going to let her.
And then at the Paris Games, as for the medal count, U.S. leading with 27 medals. France is 20. China and Great Britain are tied at 16 medals. Global news 24 hours a day, whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm John Tucker. This is Bloomberg, Paul and Tom.
John Tucker, thanks so much. Paul, what are you looking at? I got like 14 things on the agenda today.
Yeah, I'm looking at the, that NASDAQ 100, really the techie of the tech names out there, up 2.4% here. So just a solid move there. And again, it kind of calls into question, where are we in that rotation trade? People were kind of rotating out of some of those Mag 7 names over the past 2 to 3 weeks and getting into other parts of the market, including small caps. But we're seeing a little bit, maybe coming back of that, because you look at the Russell 2000, compared to the NASDAQ, it's only up 0.25%.
I mean, I'm looking at a 4-day intraday on the Bloomberg, and, granted, Microsoft trades down, 416 right now off $6. So it cratered yesterday, came back in the pre-market, and it's sort of trying to find itself here down. The percent change here is sort of goofy, but the answer is, it's down a good 6-7%. But look at 1.5%.
I'm looking at NVIDIA, Tom. I mean, here's a $2.8 trillion company. Stock's up 9.5% today.
Yeah, wow. I mean, I guess chips win. And what's Intel doing with their reorg, the mother of all
up 1%,
reorgs?
up 1.3% here.
Yeah, it's a NASDAQ bounce. I guess that's what we'll put it today. We are watching yield, and we will watch yield at 1:30. Richard Clarida, the former vice chairman of the Fed, will join us. A perfect day to speak to Professor Clarida. The 10-year real deal just flat out breaks out of the range. 1.86% on the inflation-adjusted yield. The 10-year nominal 4.09%. From New York City on this Fed Day, this is Bloomberg Surveillance.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm John Tucker in the Bloomberg Newsroom with this Bloomberg Business Flash. Let the chips fall where they may, or in this case, rise. AMD shares rising after the chipmaker's adjusted earnings per share and revenue beat analyst estimates. Analysts positive about the sales boost from its AI accelerator. Shares of AMD 10.2% higher in the early going. NVIDIA shares not far behind. NVIDIA up right now 8.7%, renamed a top U.S. chip stock by Morgan Stanley analysts for the first time in 6 months. Still need to hear from Meta. They delivered their results after the close of regular trading today. Another report from the Labor Department showing employment costs moderating during the second quarter. Just what the Fed wants to see. That data tracks wage as well as benefits. In the yield space, 2-year yields 2 basis points lower, 4.33. The 10-year 4 basis points lower, 4.09% ahead of today's Fed meeting. And we have the S&P 500 62 points higher. That's up 1.1%. The NASDAQ 100 411 points higher. That's up 2.2%. The Dow right now down 21 points. We check the markets for you all day long right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker, and that's your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
John Tucker, thank you so much. It's the last time we talked to you. Thank you for substituting for 4 people today.
Yeah, no problem.
Some illness and plague. And were you an intern as well? Did you, like, one of your jobs today was to be an intern?
What would you like in your coffee?
John Tucker, thank you.
Doing it all.
So much. Got a huge response. You were out yesterday. You were at the Vespa dealer.
Yeah, exactly.
Getting the spark plug changed.
Yep.
Tucker got rave reviews.
Of course he did. He's a professional.
Jason Furman up at Harvard with a brilliant note. We were just talking about the importance of the ECI, the Employment Cost Index, and he parses it out, Paul, that private wages and salaries were quiescent, which is why you've got this move in yields, 0.8%. If you exclude incentive-paid occupations, the number was really 1.1%. So, Tucker is completely incentive paid.
Of course.
And so if he gets nothing for July, that's how you get an adjusted ECI.
It's a tough month out there.
No question. Why don't you get you warmed up for the 10 o'clock hour here? Jamie Patton here with Trust Company of the West.
Jamie Patton, she is co-head of global rates at TCW. Tom, she is a Princeton University graduate, so my first question to every Princeton person is, what is your favorite sandwich at Hoagie Haven, Jamie?
Oh, don't make me choose. Well, I grew up in South Jersey near Philadelphia, so I always love a cheesesteak.
There you go.
And it's just hard no matter where I get it from.
There you go. I had the cheesesteak hoagie yesterday at Hoagie Haven. How about that? Yes, we did. We did have
nice
that.
Choice.
They haven't changed the price since 1980, by the way. But anyway, if you're in Princeton, that's the place to go. All right, Jamie, we're going to hear from the Federal Reserve today. I guess the market's kind of assuming nothing new here. Is that fair?
Very fair. I think the most important phrase in the statement that we are looking for, because we in the market agree there's not going to be a rate cut today, but in the forward guidance, the Fed has been saying that they are going to keep rates where they are until the committee has gained greater confidence that inflation is moving sustainably towards 2%. That's the key line that needs to change if the committee is thinking about a September ease. They need to say something like they gained further confidence, something similar to that. And even in the press conference, though, we think Powell will maintain as much optionality as he possibly can. We don't think that he's going to commit to anything on the calendar, and nor should he. How does it benefit him? The market has a cut fully priced in for September. So he doesn't really need to say or do anything if that's what he's thinking.
Jamie, the market seems to think that this Federal Reserve has done a pretty good job at negotiating a soft landing. What do you think?
I agree with what you're seeing in the market. The market is priced for absolute perfection. They have just about 3 25 basis point cuts this year, another 100 cuts next year, a very slow and steady fall back down. The trough of the Fed funds curve is 3.5%. The market thinks the Fed's doing an amazing job. And I would almost argue that the market's pricing in a no landing because rates only get to 3.5%. The Fed's own definition of the long-term dot is 2.5%. So the rates market still has rates 100 basis points above that. We completely disagree with that. That is far from reality. We think it's a fairy tale. We think the Fed will need to be cutting because they have to. The market's telling a story of a Fed who cuts because they can, and it's nice and lovely. We think the Fed's looking at data that is lagged, and what we're seeing and hearing is the consumer's already weakening, and the Fed's going to keep rates too high for too long, and we'll see a much harder landing than priced in.
Okay, this is really important. It dovetails into what I need your help on as head of global rates at Trust Company of the West. And that is, we've been, the technicals, folks, on the 10-year nominal and the 10-year real yield, I'll be really CFA. They're a mess. Okay, we got there. Now, Jamie, I'm looking at range-bound yields, and we're finally breaking down on yield through support. I got a 10-year of 1.85 moments ago, a real yield. I got a nominal of a 409. Can Trust Company of the West say we're breaking out of the range to a new disinflationary regime?
Yes, we're well on our way. And we think it'll be a bumpy ride. We don't think this is a one-way train. You'll probably get a good opportunity to add duration if you missed it. We're already long. We're already in steepeners. This market is giving you a gift. They're saying, if you buy duration now, and we have this perfect soft landing that's priced in, you get index-like returns, good job. Where we totally disagree and think there's a big opportunity for alpha is that getting long duration, when we see a harder landing that's priced in, and in our view, a legitimately hard landing, you're going to generate a lot of alpha with that long duration position.
Jamie, for better or worse, this is an election year. How do you guys kind of factor that into your calculus here?
So what you've seen the past few weeks is that every time the odds of a Trump presidency jump, you'll see this knee-jerk reaction in the market where yields rise a little bit, the curve steepens, the dollar rallies, but those are all short-lived. And we think that's fair that the moves are short-lived. Totally disagree that it doesn't matter who's president. We're going to see an increasing deficit. We're going to see an increase in treasury yields. The thing that markets have completely wrong, in our opinion, is that it doesn't matter. The huge deficit, it's not fiscally prudent, don't get me wrong, but it's not today's trade. Historically, there's been zero correlation between the size of the deficit and treasury issuance and the level of yields. Where it does matter is a steeper curve. It increases term premium and you see a steeper curve. So that reinforces our view that the curve will be steeper. And by the way, our long duration positions are concentrated in the front end for that reason. So regardless of who is president, you're going to see some volatility, which is going to create opportunities, but it doesn't really matter. What will trump the election impact, did you see what I did there?
Yeah,
and actually drive rates.
You got to go to Princeton to do that.
Yeah.
Sorry, my husband's going to kill me. We think what will really drive rates is the weakening economy. And you're seeing the consumer already become stretched. Okay. You're seeing them increasing headwinds already.
Jamie, thank you so much. Got to run on breaking news. Jamie Patton, thank you so much. Trust Company of the West, SPX up 1.2%. Here's the headline. New York City taxi regulator agrees not to impose new rules on Uber and Lyft. And this goes 2 weeks ago to a substantial protest, Uber drivers at their New York City headquarters. So
I'm not sure exactly what the rules were going to be, but I mean, I'm seeing Uber stock rising here. Yeah. So we'll get some more reporting on that. Uber, Lyft shares extend gains to more than 3% on the news.
Yeah, well, we'll have to see on that as well. Michael Barr was yelling at me so loud yesterday, he lost his voice. He wants real jazz. So we did Dave Grusin earlier.
Yeah,
he produced, I remember staring at a Blue Note record going, who is this guy? Earl Klug was an absolute star. Paul, like 17 years old, out of Detroit.
Yep.
And he had a nylon string guitar, and he changed jazz single-handedly with Chet Atkins and George Benson. Earl Klug with one of his early hits to keep Michael Barr happy.